That's next week, though. Time kind of flies.
He gave you a card.
Yeah, you
I've got this. All right, let's do it.
The time is 7 o'clock, and we will call to order the City Council meeting for December 9th, 2019. Roll call, please.
Mr. Jones?
Here.
Mrs. Keller?
Here.
Mr. Hoffman?
Here.
Mr. Farrell?
Here.
Mr. Hellinger?
Here.
Vice Mayor Schaefer?
Here.
Mayor Riggle?
Here. Tonight's invocation will be led by Reverend Tracy Sumner, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. If you will all please stand.
Let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we come this evening to another City Council meeting where you have blessed us abundantly through 2019. We thank you for allowing us the opportunity to grow and to learn as a community and to share and to experience life as it is today. We want to thank you for the leaders who you continue to allow to guide and direct and share and help us make the decisions that will impact all of our lives, oh Father. We just thank you for allowing them the opportunity to learn and grow and share together that they might help us as a community. As we leave this 2019 and we're getting ready for 2020, oh Lord, we know that you have even more exciting and wonderful things for us to do. There are going to be some hard decisions, oh Lord. We ask that we seek your guidance and your will and your understanding as we walk through, talk through, and share those difficult decisions. Those things that are not always going to be popular, not always going to be wonderful, not always going to be fun, but it is the right thing to do. We just ask that you guide them and lead them and help them understand as they are sharing and doing what's right for us. We thank you even now that we would want to share and support them and help them, encourage them, lift them up, that they might be able to do the work for this community. We thank you, O Lord, even for now, as we look at the end of this year, that you will allow us to do what's right in your sight. In the name of Jesus, let all of God's children say amen.
Amen. Thank you, Reverend Sumner. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Reverend. Item 4 on the agenda is the approval of the motion summary. Elaine, if you'll read this into the record.
Do you like to do it separate or together?
Let's do them together.
Okay. Approval of the motion summary of the regular meeting of council held on November 25th, 2019 as recorded and transcribed, and approval of the motion summary of the budget work session meeting held of council held on December 2nd, 2019 as recorded and transcribed.
Move for approval of both motion summaries.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Keller, second by Mr. Schaefer. Roll call, please.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mrs. Keller?
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Farrell?
Yes.
Mr. Hellinger?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Schaefer?
Yes.
Mayor Riggle?
Yes. Motion carries. Item 5 is the consent agenda. If you'll please read this in the record.
Item A, acceptance of the motion summary of the Planning Commission meeting held on November 6, 2019 as recorded and transcribed. Item B, resolution number 19-52, a resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into a cooperative agreement with Delaware County to establish a regional central traffic signal software system used by both jurisdictions. And item C, resolution number 19-53, a resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into a cooperative agreement with Delaware County to jointly fund computer-aided dispatch software and services.
Thank you. Any questions on the consent agenda? Any motions?
Move for approval of consent agenda.
Second.
The motion by Mr. Schaefer, a second by Ms. Keller. Roll call, please.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mrs. Keller?
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Farrell?
Yes.
Mr. Hellinger?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Schaefer?
Yes.
Mayor Riggle?
Yes, motion carries. Item 6 is time set aside for letters, petitions, and public comments for anything that's not on tonight's agenda. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to come forward at this time? Yeah, go ahead. If you please give us your name and address as you're seated for the record.
Yeah, my name is Mike Rush, 778 Canal Street here in Delaware. A couple items. First and foremost, continue thoughts and prayers for Councilman Chris Jones and his family. Second, please, during the holiday season, please pray and have thoughts for Unit 426 out of Middletown, Ohio. They will be deployed tomorrow morning. Unit of military policemen will be going to Texas for a couple of weeks, then Guantanamo Bay for 9 months. So that's about 400 people that's not going to be home for Christmas. So keep them in your thoughts and prayers. And third, well, my son's one of them, so third and foremost was a pretty good-sized fire this morning at a warehouse on Curtis and Park. And Chief Donahue's not here. It's been a long day for him. $3 million worth of products of my company is in that warehouse, and none of it was touched by fire or water. We share that space with Scott's Lawn, and it was their product that caused the issue. But we hear it said so many times in the years and meetings in the past how great of a EMS service we have here in this fine city of Delaware. And I just want to, my boss had mentioned to me that maybe I should say thank you for the quick response for the companies that were involved. From what I hear, it was a 6-alarm fire, so we had a pretty good sized amount of fire equipment there. So just sorry, Chief, you're not here, but thank you. And Chief Pisnowski, whatever services the police department gave, that very much, thank you very much.
We will pass it on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Susie? Hi.
Hi, name and address?
Name and address.
Susie Bibler, Executive Director at Main Street Delaware, 20 East Winter Street.
Caroline Pusateri, Program Coordinator at Main Street Delaware, 20 East Winter Street.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and council members. We just wanted to come here tonight to,
Okay.
it's okay.
That door's locked. Can you get out? Okay.
We just wanted to come here tonight to thank you all for your support and making a very successful holiday weekend that we just got finished with. We couldn't do it without the support of all of you. Many people here in this room, Tom Homan, Kim Gepper, Elaine, police, fire departments, public works, communication, and parks and natural resources. We know that we can't do what we do without all of your help and support, and we just wanted to thank you for your partnership.
Thank you. It was a fabulous weekend. So great job to both of you. Yes.
Hello. My name's Ralph Hodges. I'm representing the Arts Castle at 190 West Winter Street in Delaware. One of the items that you'll be considering this month is the community grants, and I just wanted to thank Council for its past support, but also to emphasize how important it is to help the castle meet its mission of serving this community. The average not-for-profit arts organization generates about 48% of its operating expense from earned income. Now, we're a little bit better than that. We're probably in the 56, 57%. But there's obviously a delta that has to be met from government support, corporate donations, individual philanthropy, and grants. And we have a wonderful mosaic, see I threw in a little art term, a wonderful mosaic of support from this community, all of those that I mentioned. And each part of it is critical because in order to meet and serve this community, we need that community support. So one of the things that I just wanted to emphasize is that this is a pretty efficient way of providing arts to our community and our citizens. Some of the competitive communities that surround us, the Upper Arlingtons, the Worthingtons, the Dublins, just to name the contiguous ones, all have a arts facility, not as good as the Arts Castle, but a similar arts facility that is funded virtually 100% by that community. The grants that you provide are a percentage of our operating budget, and by providing that, we're able to provide the equal or better services to our community that those communities do at 100%. So it's a pretty good trade-off and return on investment. I would also suggest to you that the arts is a very important part of the quality of life. And quality of life is one of those things that businesses and individuals look at when they're deciding whether to move into a community or stay in a community. And together, I think we serve that very well. The last point I'd make is that your grant dollars allow us to leverage, because a lot of the foundations, other governmental grantors, and even some individuals ask, well, what does your home community, how do they support? And so by taking those dollars that you support, we're able to get other people to match and even sometimes multiply. So again, thank you for your past support, and thank you for the future support that you will consider tonight or over the next few weeks. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to come forward at this time? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to committee reports. Mrs. Keller?
So, jumping to the Community Promotions Committee, and I spoke with Mr. Hodges today on the phone, and he didn't know anything about how much the committee had recommended for the budget process. And so I'm wondering if perhaps in the future, once the committees give the suggested awards to council, if maybe we should write the applicants a letter and say this is only a recommendation, and then they would have between that time and when the budget is completed to come back and say this is what the impact would be on our organization.
Absolutely. Yes.
So
we'll follow it. Yes, we should do that.
Just a suggestion
Yep,
for the future.
makes sense.
And then if there was a way to move the numbers around and find a little bit more for the Arts Castle, I know it's
always tough.
It's always tough, but I do think that they provide a wonderful service that's available to so many in our community, and just throwing that out there that it's always a difficult numbers game, and we struggled with this as we were doing it. I also think we maybe need to change the scoring criteria a little bit to not favor one-time requests as much, because it certainly seems like we have some major organizations in our city that we tend to fund every year for good reason. The Central Ohio Symphony, Main Street Delaware, and the Arts Castle all provide tremendous value.
And SWCI.
And SWCI, tremendous value to our citizens, and we may want to consider looking and revising some of that criteria, especially when so many of their operating dollars come from these grants. The more years that we're doing this, the more applications that we get, we'll tend to keep splitting that same piece of that fund, and I'm just wondering if there's maybe a better way to do it with some of the ones that we tend to fund every year, so they don't have to worry that if 100 people apply and they're all worthy, that maybe they would be cut next year down to 50% of what they were this year maybe.
You can look at that criteria.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. I doubt you've had a committee meeting yet, so we'll jump to Mr. Ellinger. I guess we're going to jump out here. Did you
I have
any
nothing.
this past 2 weeks? How about you?
Parking safety was scheduled to meet this month, but we don't have any agenda items, so we're taking a month off.
For you, okay. We'll move on to item 8, which is consideration of a liquor permit trucks. Elaine, if you want to read this in.
Consideration of a liquor permit trucks for 219 South Sandusky Street LLC at 219 South Sandusky Street, Delaware, Ohio, 43015, permit class D5.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of council. As you may have known, Marco's Pizza moved out of 219 South Sandusky Street, leaving a vacant restaurant building down that way. Brian Myers has purchased the Massey's Pizza in the Powell area, and he's recently gotten the franchise for Delaware as well. So he started the Powell one first. It was an existing operational franchise. Delaware will be a new franchise for him. Considering the fact that we do not have any existing liquor licenses in Delaware, he went ahead and bought the license he needed for Powell, and then bought an extra license at the address in Powell, which you're allowed to do, which allows him to Trex then that Powell license up to Delaware to use it for this restaurant in Delaware. So that's what he is requesting now. It is an economic development Trex. He will be providing jobs, payroll, and investment in the South Corridor, which is another one of those corridors that we would like to see continued reinvestment in.
So in this instance, the police department did the liquor permit background report for purposes of the Trex. So we have no issue with the location or the applicant, and found nothing that would substantiate an objection when the permit comes in. So what you'll be voting on tonight is to approve the Trex and also authorize the city manager to sign off on that legislative notice once it comes in, you will not be requesting an objection.
Okay.
Or a hearing, should I say.
Just by way of explanation for our new members, this is not a standard way you have to do it, but we came up with this one-stop process to move projects along faster, because approving the Trex means they can move it into the city. They're going to submit paperwork, could be as much as a month or two later, and then we could have another legislation in front of you saying we don't object, but Chief's already done the investigation, so we've combined it, so as soon as we get that paperwork, we don't have to come back to council to make it faster. Sorry, I'm losing my voice.
Okay.
Move for approval of the Trex, no objection.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Schaefer, second by Ms. Keller. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Keller?
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Farrell?
Yes.
Mr. Hellinger?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Schaefer?
Yes.
Mayor Riggle?
Yes. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
3 minutes early.
Time she reads them.
Chris? It's slow, I guess.
It's like 5 words.
I know. I don't know what else to do. We're 3 minutes early.
I could do my budget thing and stop 3 minutes.
Yeah, you just stay right where you're at. Read.
So, ordinance number 19-75, an ordinance amending chapter 192, section 192.03 of Delaware's codified ordinances and declaring an emergency. Emergency clause. This ordinance is declared to be an emergency measure necessary for the immediate preservation of the public peace, property, health, safety, and welfare of the city. The emergency clause is required to enact the changes effective on January 1st, 2020, as required by the Ohio Revised Code. Therefore, this ordinance shall be in full force and effect on January 1st, 2020.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Why'd you look so confused all of a sudden, Laura?
Well, she started talking and I thought, did I step up before it was my turn?
No, you're fine.
Thank you. For those of you that don't know me yet, I'm Lori Johnson, our City Income Tax Administrator. This past summer, the state passed its biennium budget bill, and the significance to us and the reason for the ordinance before you is that included in the bill was an amendment adding 2 definitions to Ohio Revised Code Chapter 718, which is the chapter on municipal income tax. As Council Clerk read to you in the proposed ordinance, the 2 definitions we are talking about are pension and retirement benefit plan. By adding these 2 definitions in addition to already exempted qualified retirement income, the state has exempted a segment of non-qualified retirement income from being taxed by municipalities. Supplemental executive retirement plans, or SERPs as they are referred to, are a type of income paid to top executives upon retirement. Whereas previously taxed as ordinary income, the new definitions added to ORC 718 exempt both qualified and non-qualified retirement plans, making SERP income non-taxable. To be in compliance with ORC 718 and consistent with what is defined as exempt income, we need to amend our ordinance to incorporate these terms as the state has defined them. While there's no way to know exactly how this will impact our tax revenues, no significant impact is anticipated. I know Dean had an opportunity to address you guys last week at your council budget work session and went through the first reading with you guys, but at this time, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to address those for you.
Just for purposes of a little background, I know the Central Ohio Mayors and Managers Group had been monitoring this legislation and were concerned about it as another kind of intrusion into home rule and allowing us to be able to establish the ability to tax that type of income, but we were unsuccessful, and hence the legislation that is being placed before you this evening. It does affect, I think, probably the more higher income communities, I think. I know that was...
Communities that might have more of those residents who are high paid executives who retire and would have that benefit.
Any other questions? Lori? Dean, did you want to chime in on anything? Are you good?
No, this is just, we may see more of these changes down the road. We elected to maintain our own income tax code as opposed to just deferring to the Ohio Revised Code version. State's pretty adamant. They want to try to keep things consistent from one city to the next, and it probably makes sense. There may be a time down the road where we look at it and say, rather than a couple times a year maybe changing definitions and this and that and whatever, then maybe we just look at it and say, we'll adopt the Ohio Revised Code version, and as they amend it, ours is also amended without going through a legislative process.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We'll open this up for a public hearing. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to come forward at this time on the subject? Seeing none, we will close that public hearing.
And we would recommend council's consideration and action this evening, if you could. I mean, it's not, you don't have to, but you could take it to a third reading, but it's, I think, but there's not going to be a lot.
You really don't have a choice but to pass it, right?
You have to pass it,
Yeah.
right.
Well,
You're
Otherwise,
just, if you want to wait, that's fine, but it's,
I'm gonna
there's no.
move to waive the rule requiring 3 readings on ordinance 19-75.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Schaefer, second by Ms. Keller. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Keller?
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Farrell?
Yes.
Mr. Hellinger?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Schaefer?
Yes.
Mayor Riggle?
Yes.
Move for approval of the emergency clause on ordinance 19-75.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Schaefer, second by Ms. Keller. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Keller?
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Farrell?
Yes.
Mr. Hellinger?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Schaefer?
Yes.
Mayor Riggle?
Yes.
Move for the approval of ordinance 19-75.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Schaefer, second by Ms. Keller. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Keller?
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Farrell?
Yes.
Mr. Hellinger?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Schaefer?
Yes.
Mayor Riggle?
Yes. Motion carries.
If I could make a motion to excuse Councilman Jones, who had to leave and take care of his son, and if we could all just offer up a thought and a prayer for Graham.
I'll second that motion.
Mrs. Keller?
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Farrell?
Yes.
Mr. Hellinger?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Schaefer?
Yes.
Mayor Riggle?
Yes. We'll move on to, let's do item 13. Second reading of ordinance number 19-70.
Ordinance number 19-70, an ordinance amending the Delaware Municipal Court and Clerk of Court employee benefits and leave policies and declaring an emergency clause. This ordinance is declared to be an emergency measure necessary for the immediate preservation of the public peace, property, health, safety, and welfare of the city. The emergency clause is required to enact the changes effective on December 25th, 2019. Therefore, this ordinance shall be in full force and effect immediately upon its passage.
Thank you. We're moving you up to get you out of here.
I was fine. I
It's okay.
multitask all day, every day. Good evening. My name is Judge Mary Ann Hemmeter. I'm one of your municipal court judges. Thank you for accommodating me because I could not be here last Monday. Do you have any questions about the budget? I do have some good news. When we submit our budget, we always ask for money. The good news is that I just found out last Friday that we are getting a $50,000 grant for our specialized dockets that can be applied retroactively to salaries. So I've sat down with my staff to figure out how we're gonna do that. I'm not quite sure how you retroactively apply it to salaries, but I guess it's done across the state routinely. So that is at least a boost for our probation department. Do you have any questions? I know Clerk DeNovo was here last week, but any questions about the budget? Any forecasting for the future? Any questions? I'll be happy to answer.
Any questions for the judge?
Just a comment that you do an incredible, amazing job. The specialized dockets are such a breath of fresh air for so many people and giving so many people a second chance.
Well, don't thank me, thank my staff. I think this is probably the 4th or 5th year I've come to you guys to say probation is understaffed. We continue to have over 200 cases per probation officer. The grant money and the specialized dockets, that does help. But the probation staff for this municipal court, and we do have countywide jurisdiction. I think municipal court is somewhat of a misnomer. People think we only have jurisdiction in the city. We have countywide jurisdiction. Our probation officers work their tails off. They're always on call 24/7. There's been a lot of growth in the last 4 years. I'm looking for other ways to get funding because we probably could use, by numbers, 2 more full-time probation officers, but we're out of space. And quite frankly, you know what the money's like. We don't have a lot of extra. So we're doing what we can, but don't thank me, thank my staff, because they are the best staff that I think we've ever had at the municipal court. And they do really work hard. I've never seen a more dedicated bunch of probation officers. And when you have defendants who come in and say, I never thought my probation officer would be my friend, it does kind of make you stop and think that the court actually is meeting some of its goals in terms of meeting some individuals on their road to recovery. If it's possible within a court setting, other people just go to jail. We don't, I'm not disillusioned that we can help solve every problem, but those people who are ready for change do get the help they need at the probation department. So thanks for your support. We'll see. There are going to be changes in the drug laws. We don't know what is going to happen yet. I'm told that we are going to probably pick up 200 to 300 cases a year once it's all said and done.
Wow.
So we'll see. To be continued.
Thank your staff for us, okay?
Yeah, it's staffing. Where's Pigeonowski? It's staffing for everybody. So that's where we're at. Judge Sunderman does retire. His open house is Friday. Please stop by. He's served at the municipal court for 18 years, which I joke, that's about 58 years in common pleas time. So, but you know, any other questions I'd be happy to field. I know there's issues, but I think, you know, we tackle them as best we can.
Do you want to just mention that you'll be the administrative judge for 2020 and what that means for our new council members?
The administrative judge, basically what it means is any HR decisions, tracking of Supreme Court reports, tracking of budgeting, that falls on the administrative judge. I've been the administrative judge for 3 years. When I became judge, Judge Sunderman stayed on as administrative judge, but was happy to let me handle all the HR matters. We don't have that many, thankfully, but we don't have a separate HR office at the court. We rely on the city's resources. We don't have a separate court administrator. So when it comes to grant writing, correspondence with state agencies to figure out how to get money for certain things, that is work that falls on usually my probation department head, Doug Stogler, myself, some combination of a magistrate. We did hire a part-time magistrate this year to help out because our civil cases are growing and we were getting behind by Supreme Court numbers. But the administrative judge takes care of all that administrative job. It probably is a part-time job on top of everything else you do with the HR matters, the budgeting and seeking grants. But to me, it's part of what judges are elected to do. So we don't defer to a court administrator, we do it ourselves. Now, if there ever becomes a time when our court grows to 3 or more judges, which I don't think is unrealistic in the next 10 years, I think at that point our court administrator might be necessary. But right now we're doing good. So it's HR is not my forte. We're lucky we have great staffing, so we haven't had to do a lot of HR interference. But when we do rely on the city, and the employees of the city do a great job helping us out. Anything? Okay, very good. I'm going to go sit down.
Thank you very much. And we'll vote on that, as part of the budget.
Yeah,
This
right,
isn't
yep.
separate at all. Okay, we'll go back up to item 10, which is a 7:30 public hearing. Elaine, if you'll please read this in.
Ordinance number 19-69, an ordinance making appropriations for the year 2020 and declaring an emergency. Emergency clause, that this ordinance is hereby declared to be an emergency measure necessary to provide for the public peace, safety, health, and welfare of the city, and further to provide lawful appropriations available for expenditure by January 1st, 2020, and as such will be in full force and effect immediately upon its passage.
Thank you.
So we are second reading, second public hearing tonight, and we have a few more departmental reviews that we'll do towards the end of the meeting after you've completed your other action items, and then we have some wrap-up items that we'll go over with you regarding the year-end supplemental. And I know the finance director, Dean Stelzer, wants to provide some comments regarding our financial guidelines and policies. So we'll do that towards after you've gotten this other stuff off the agenda. So that's what I have at this point.
Okay.
Public.
We will open this up for a public hearing. Is there anybody here tonight on this item of the budget for 2020? Yes.
Brett Latta, 376 North Sandusky. Good evening, Madam Mayor, and welcome new members of council. And I just quickly want to say thanks to the Finance Director. I'm not sure when your last day is, but thanks for your service to the city. So I've just been following the budget last couple of weeks, and the topic of transportation and infrastructure and funding keeps coming up. And I just feel like I need to add that you know, it's obvious that our 2016 levy failed pretty hard, but I think it's time, whether it's 2020 or 2021, to revisit some kind of transportation related tax increase. I know tax is a dirty word, but I think our impact fees don't seem to be doing all that we need them to do. Collecting those for 20 years. I don't really recommend raising those because it's just going to, you know, drive the cost of our housing even higher. I want Delaware to be affordable for everyone. So I think you think long and hard about how to approach the city again. My recommendation would be to not make it a permanent increase, but to keep it at perhaps 5 years. If I understand correctly, we haven't had an increase since 1980 that hasn't been dedicated to fire, EMS, or parks, or police. Maybe not all those, but it's been 40 years. So you know how busy the planning department is. Director doesn't need to talk about that again tonight. People want to live here, so that's pretty much all I got. Thanks.
Can I put you down in the citizens group if we get started on this?
Sure.
Thank you. My first one. Anybody else from the public that would like to come forward at this time? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. And we'll move on to 11 and 12. Elaine, if you'll read these in the record.
Ordinance number 19-65, an ordinance approving a preliminary development plan request by TNR Properties for the enclave at the Ravines at Olentangy, containing 87 single-family attached units on approximately 14.906 acres on property zoned R6 PMU, multifamily residential district with a planned mixed-use overlay district, located on the north side of Curve Road and west of Rochdale Run. Ordinance number 19-66, an ordinance approving a preliminary subdivision plat request by TNR Properties for the enclave at the Ravines at Olentangy, containing 87 single-family attached units on approximately 14.906 acres on property zoned R6 PMU, multifamily residential district with a planned mixed-use overlay district, located on the north side of Curve Road and west of Rochdale Run.
Thank you. Mr. Eflin?
Madam Mayor, members of council, we will continue to recommend approval of this. I think you were provided an update on the EPA meeting today, excuse me, from Director Farina, who may want to provide you a further summary.
I'll just be brief. The meeting went very well as expected. The EPA is pleased with the status of our landfill. All monitoring is in compliance, and they consider it extremely low risk location right now with no apparent migration of gas away from the site, under full control within compliance. So that's what I thought we'd be reporting, but we've confirmed that meeting directly with EPA today. But I can answer any questions regarding the bullet points of the meeting that I think City Manager Holman shared with you.
Okay. Comments, questions?
Move for approval of ordinance number 19-65.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Keller, second by Mr. Schaefer. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Keller?
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Farrell?
Yes.
Mr. Hellinger?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Schaefer?
Yes.
Mayor Riggle?
Yes.
Move for approval of ordinance number 19-66.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Keller, second by Mr. Schaefer. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Keller?
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Farrell?
Yes.
Mr. Hellinger?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Schaefer?
Yes.
Mayor Riggle?
Yes, motion carries. Moving on to item 14, this is second reading of ordinance number 19-71.
Ordinance number 19-71, an ordinance amending ordinance number 18-111, establishing the pay and benefits for various part-time and intermittent and seasonal employees of the City of Delaware and declaring an emergency. Emergency clause. This ordinance is declared to be an emergency measure necessary for the immediate preservation of the public peace, property, health, safety, and welfare of the city. The emergency clause is required to enact the changes effective on December 25th, 2019. Therefore, this ordinance shall be in full force and effect immediately upon its passage.
You can go ahead and read 15, 16, 17, just keep going.
Ordinance number 19-72, an ordinance amending the management, professional, technical, confidential, and supervisory employees pay plan and declaring an emergency. Emergency clause. This ordinance is declared to be an emergency measure necessary for the immediate preservation of the public peace, property, health, safety, and welfare of the city. The emergency clause is required to enact the changes effective on December 25th, 2019, which coincides with the new calendar year. Therefore, this ordinance shall be in full force and effect immediately upon its passage. Ordinance number 19-73, an ordinance amending the employment agreement with the city manager and declaring an emergency. Emergency clause. This ordinance is declared to be an emergency measure necessary for the immediate preservation of the public peace, property, health, safety, and welfare of the city. The emergency clause is required to enact the changes effective to December 25th, 2019. Therefore, this ordinance shall be in full force and effect immediately upon its passage. And ordinance number 19-74, an ordinance establishing the salary and benefits of the council clerk and declaring an emergency. Emergency clause. This ordinance is declared to be an emergency measure necessary for the immediate preservation of the public peace, property, health, safety, and welfare of the city. The emergency clause is required to enact the changes effective on December 25th, 2019, which coincides with the new calendar year and the effective date of the management pay plan for 2019. Therefore, this ordinance shall be in full force and effect immediately upon its passage.
Thank you. Those will all come back for a third reading, as they always do. It'll be on the last meeting of the year. Move on to item 18, which is consideration of ordinance number 19-76.
Ordinance number 19-76, an ordinance approving a combined preliminary and final development plan for Delaware City Schools for an expansion to Schultz Elementary School located at 499 Applegate Lane on property zoned R4, medium density residential district, which encompasses approximately 36.47 acres.
Thank you. Mr. Eflin?
Madam Mayor, members of council, this is for the second expansion of Schultz Elementary in the last few years. I think we all know where Schultz is in our community on the west side on a rather large piece of ground. It is zoned R4 residential and does have a conditional use permit placed on it with the last expansion to allow the school. Aerial photograph, should we need to refer to it, but essentially we're talking about this area of the site. We can zoom in and talk a little bit about the Pennock Avenue or Cobblestone Drive extension, whichever road name you like. I think the city engineer is going to have to decide which one it might be for us. But that's part of this proposal, in addition to some additional landscaping with evergreen trees on this side of the site. So the proposal is for a total of about 16,500 square feet of expansion, about 15,000 square feet, a little over in a south wing, and then a small expansion in this location near the kitchen area. As I mentioned, the Pennock Cobblestone extension is a big part of this project, as is a dedicated bus drop-off loop and then a T turnaround on Marvin Lane. There will be continuance of the bike path, sidewalk ability that exists today, but that goes in and feeds into the surrounding neighborhoods. Your Planning Commission did recommend unanimous approval of this case, and I would just say that, as always, working with our city schools has been tremendous. We've had good, productive meetings, and we will continue to do that with this school and the addition of the other schools' expansions as they come forward. I think we had some discussion at Planning Commission relative to who pays for the extension of the road, and I think the city manager's office has been engaged with the city school district on a partnership in that approach, and Tom may have some comments he wants to add to that as well. Happy to answer any questions you may have. We recommend approval at this time.
Yeah, we are in discussions with the schools regarding a cost-sharing arrangement for that road project. Obviously, this is something that came up when Schultz School was originally planned back in the mid-90s. There was consideration then at the time that this would eventually have to be extended, so we're trying to work out something that's fair both to the schools and to the city. We are preliminarily looking at 2021 for the construction of the project, so that would coincide with the opening of the school. And so we are right now engaged in design. As going to be one of our in-kind contributions, but we have been talking about a financial contribution, and I should be able to provide something back to City Council probably in the next couple of weeks. But we had a meeting last week with Mr. Sherman, who's here this evening, and the superintendent regarding cost-sharing participation with our city engineer, public works director. But I think we can work something out that's fair to both the schools and the city.
Any questions for Dave or Tom?
I have a question for the schools if they're coming up.
If you'd like to come forward, please. Give us your name and address for the record.
Jason Sherman, Director of Facilities and Transportation for Delaware City Schools at 74 West William Street.
Thank you.
Good
Just
evening.
a question about how the drop-off will go. Will you be utilizing what was formerly known as Bus Alley as parent drop-off? And then this new loop is the new Bus Alley? Am I understanding that correctly?
That's correct.
Okay.
We plan to expand the car service for parents in the front of the building off of Applegate. And that would take place in both lots right now. And then the bus service would be moved to the new bus loop to the south.
So that would be increasing capacity for drop-off tremendously.
I believe so, yeah. Quite a few cars will be able to be queued up on the property and not in the street, which has been one of the bigger problems over there.
Yes. My children go to Schultz, one of them. The other one's at Dempsey now. And that's always been just a source of trouble in the neighborhood is at drop-off and pickup time. That's great.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. Do you want to vote on this tonight, or do you want to take it to another reading?
Is there any reason that you need this approved tonight, or can we take it to another reading? Is there?
We're planning on hopefully taking this out to bid with all of our proper approvals after the first of the year. So I think our architect is with us here tonight as well. He knows more about that part of the schedule than I do.
We have one more meeting this year.
Yeah, we have
the
one more
19th.
meeting tonight, yeah.
Tom, how soon will we know about the cost sharing? Is it gonna be down the road a little bit?
We could probably provide that in an update to you next week, before your
On the
meeting.
19th?
Yeah, before the 19th.
Can you give us your name and address? Sorry.
Yes, it's Zach Price, 328 North Liberty Street.
Thank you.
The current plan right now is to go out to bid mid-January with this project. So,
Okay. And if they can get us numbers before the next meeting, then we can vote then.
Yeah, I can
That
provide
works.
those.
That gives a little bit more time for the public to see the plan too and weigh in. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Elaine, if you'll read item 19, which is consideration of ordinance number 19-77.
Ordinance number 19-77, an ordinance for Westport Homes approving an amended preliminary subdivision plat for Springer Woods, Section 3, on approximately 47.5 acres containing 121 single-family lots on property zoned R3, one-family residential district, and located on the north side of West William Street, which is US 36 and south of Warrensburg Road.
Thank you, Ms. Jefflin.
Madam Mayor, members of council, this is for an amended preliminary subdivision plat for Springer Woods, Section 3. And I think with each amendment, it's staff's opinion, your planning commission's opinion that it's getting better and better. This development did start back in 2000, actually, so it's been going on for some time with Westport Homes, which is D.R. Horton, the nation's largest home builder, acquiring the balance of this subdivision, and we anticipate a fairly speedy build-out pending your approvals from here. So the area we're talking about is the area towards Warrensburg Road. This is a straight zone subdivision, R3 single family. Aerial photograph, should we need to refer to it, I would just point out some treed areas here and some stream and treed areas here. We'll talk about those in a moment. So there's 3 sections and then subsections within sections and subphases within subsections, which gets a little confusing, so we wanted to put a little graphic together for you. North is up. Section 1 is in orange. That has been constructed with the exception of J Court, which is being constructed, just about finished, and houses will start to be constructed there shortly. Section 2 towards 36, 37, which does have the first phase in, with some houses being constructed there as well. And what's before you tonight is an amendment to what's in yellow, which is Section 3. Okay, north is to the right, and I think all the rest of the graphics, north is to the right from here on out. But it is a rather large subdivision. So this was the original site plan 2 versions ago. Put this up here to just show you some of the genesis of this project. There really is no active recreation space. There is some notation relative to a bike path in this location and some nod to preservation of the stream corridors, but that's it. There's also roadway connections here to the west that we'll talk about. This was the amended site plan plat, in 2014. That included some active recreation and park area here in a very small, little over an acre site with frankly difficult access, very narrow and really behind all these homes, but it did get some recreation back, active recreation potentially back into the subdivision. The bike path is better defined in here, and the stream corridors are better defined, but fairly narrow. Again, we have the same access points. So what changed from that plan to this plan that's in front of you? We had that small active open space. Now there's a little over 5 acres of active open space with a tot lot, field space, boardwalks, benches, connected bike trail, and large open frontage. It was 129 lots. Actually, it was more than that. Now it's 121 lots. This is in total 37 fewer than in the year 2000. So as we add active open space and account for modern stormwater management, protect the streams, lots come out. There was a dedicated, disconnected really bike trail and open spaces. Now we think they're really connected from the bike trail to the open spaces across the development. With the 2014 change, there was a requirement of $1,000 in lieu of planting fee for trees. There were about 500 and some caliper inches of trees that were to be replanted in the site. There's just not room to do that, and frankly, they're preserving a lot of trees across this site now. When you do the math across the lots that are left, that makes that tree planting in lieu of fee go up to $1,321, and the applicant has agreed to pay that. There were 2 stub streets to the west since the year 2000. Those lots have been developed in the township with large lot single family, so our engineering department looking at that really felt that there was no need to stub 2 streets to those lots at this time, but there was a need to stub the street into the property known as the Davis property, which is a property that fronts US 36 immediately to the west of this site. And there were also 2 stub streets kind of to the south and the east on the diagram. We've eliminated one of those, but still maintained 2 stub streets to the Davis property, and of course, that have access off 36, 37. And this allowed for an overall better layout for what's in front of you tonight. I've taken the opportunity to put some color highlights on this map. This is obviously the green space, the active space that I described. The streams really show up as preserved, and on this diagram you can see active stormwater management taking up quite a lot of room of the subdivision in today's current requirements. And then in black are bike path connections that come all the way through the site and around the top lot. And actually there's a stub bike path coming through the adjacent subdivision to the east that will be connected in so that these individuals can jump on the pathway network and use the active recreation space. I think overall it's a much better road layout, it's a much better open space, and we have active open space opportunity within this subdivision now. Again, they are R3 straight zoning, and they have rights of development of many years ago, but to the developer's credit, we very much appreciate them working with us as staff across departments to accommodate what we feel is a much better subdivision and much closer to today's standards if you were going to develop this under our current codes today. Happy to answer any questions that you may have. We recommend approval, as does your planning commission unanimously.
Thank you, Dave. Any questions for Mr. Eflin?
Well, I'm sorry, here's an overall that the developer put together that maybe puts it in context a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So on this project where we charge a flat fee per lot for trees, I'm just concerned, is there a disincentive for them to save trees because?
We didn't charge a flat fee. Their requirement is if they take trees out on a straight zone subdivision that they need to replant them on site. That's our first preference. Replant them off site. That's very rarely used except for big institutional users for obvious reasons, I think. Or make a payment in lieu of, or a combination of all 3. And so in this case, it really becomes essentially a combination of 2 of those, but because it's straight zoned, we had to go ahead and we can't give them credit for preservation of trees. It's very nice, and we appreciate them preserving trees. There are some reasons not to develop in the trees as well. But I think overall, this development can accommodate that tree fee of $1,300 per house from here on out. Had you spread that fee over all the sections, it would have been lower, obviously, but that would have required knowing this layout in 2000, which of course we didn't. Couldn't have done it.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Eflin? Would the applicant like to add anything to this report?
I don't have anything to add. I'm with Westport. My name's Terry Nichols.
You have to come to the microphone if you're going to talk. Sorry.
I shouldn't have talked.
It's okay. Could have said no. Go ahead.
My name's Terry Andrews. I'm with Westport Homes, address 507 Executive Park Campus Drive, Westerville, Ohio. I really don't have anything to add other than I believe we're protecting the substantial amount of open space and trees. We've added a lot of areas that we're going to protect, so we're really excited about that and excited to be in the city. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Okay. Thank you very much for being here this evening. What is the wish of council? Do you want to take a turn in the reading and I'll vote tonight on it? You can come back to another reading if nobody.
Yeah,
That's
I mean,
fine.
I think
Might as well.
I think it's a good plan. It's a much improved plan. I was really,
Yeah, it is.
we're really thrilled with it. Okay, we'll bring it back on the 19th. Elaine, if you'll read 20, oops, wait a minute, let's do 19. No, that was that. 20 and 21.
Ordinance number 19-78, an ordinance approving a final development plan request by Medrock LLC for Willowbrook Section 3 containing 88 single-family lots on approximately 22.5 acres on property zoned R6 and R3 and R6, one family residential district and multifamily residential district, and located on the north and south side of Boulder Drive between Minton Drive and Firestone Drive. And ordinance number 19-79, an ordinance approving a final subdivision plat request by Medrock LLC for Willowbrook Section 3 containing 88 single-family lots on property on approximately 22.5 acres on property zoned R3 and R6, one family residential district and multifamily residential district, and located on the north and south side of Boulder Drive between Minton Drive and Firestone Drive.
Thank you. Mr. Eflin?
Madam Mayor, members of council, this is for the last single-family section within the Willowbrook planned unit development, now known as Willowbrook Section 3. This is final plan and subdivision plat. The subdivision is located on the north and south sides of Boulder Drive, or what will be Boulder Drive. And again, this property, you see a lot of colors up here, but this property is zoned as a planned unit development with a specific preliminary plan that's been approved and a specific zoning text to go along with it. Aerial photograph, should we need to refer to it. This is the approved preliminary plan. Highlighted in blue here is the subject section. This is multifamily area 4. Which will be the only remaining section in addition to some retail site space up near 36 as well. Multifamily 4 is not in front of you tonight, it's just the single family. So the proposed development plan is completely in accordance with the approved preliminary plan. It does include 88 single family lots on a little over 22 acres. It's laid out in this fashion. And we have the plat for you as well. Your planning commission does recommend unanimous approval, as do we as staff. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Questions?
I had one. In the staff report, it mentioned some lots that needed to be increased. So I was wondering how that works. If you increase one lot, doesn't that create a domino effect of impacting other lots as well?
That's exactly right, Councilwoman Keller. And easements and existing infrastructure that's already been put in place. With a planned unit development, much like the last development that we were talking about, which wasn't a planned development, but with, I guess, any development, we try to work with the developer to bring up things like our street width standards to today in places where it makes sense, and our corner lot standards in places where it makes sense. Sometimes you can't do that all the time, partially for reasons that you just mentioned. So you'll notice a condition within your recommendations in your ordinance relative to a few lots. We've worked through a few lots already in the subdivision, and they will comply. We think 3 out of 4 of those lots noted in your conditions, working with the developer, we can make comply. There's only 1 lot that will not be able to comply, largely for the reasons you just mentioned. And it's really not in size. It complies with the PUD text in all respects. It just doesn't comply with today's corner lot standards, which it doesn't have to legally. But what happens is if you make this wider, you throw 2 or 3 lots up here into nonconformity with the planned unit development text. And so there's no point in throwing 3 lots into nonconformity to gain 1 lot.
That's what I was wondering, how you do that.
So it's really just that lot, and again, that lot complies with the PUD text for all the minimum requirements.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions for Mr. Eflin?
Any issues at planning?
Other than that corner lot that we went over and over and over?
And Boulder will be extended through, is that correct? That's a significant benefit for this project. As anybody who has traveled Boulder or who lives over on that side of the city, getting that connection and ultimately getting the connection all the way to Section Line Road would just be another nice gap to be filled on the network. So that will be very, very beneficial for the community.
Okay. I don't think the applicants, yeah, I don't think left. Okay, I guess we'll take that to another reading. Does the wish of council? Take it. Okay, we'll move on to item 22. Wayne, if you want to read this then? Sorry.
Ordinance number 19-80, an ordinance providing for the issuance and sale of bonds in the maximal principal amount of $16,500,000 for the purpose of paying the cost of refunding bonds previously issued by the city for the purpose of paying the cost of improving the city's municipal recreation facilities, including the construction of a recreation center to provide fitness, track, swimming, and indoor and outdoor multi-purpose facilities and athletic fields, and the construction, renovation, and improvement of other municipal recreation facilities, including the provisions of furnishing and equipment for the center and all of such other facilities and acquired related interest in real property and otherwise improving the same, together with all necessary appurtenances thereto, and declaring an emergency. Emergency clause. This ordinance is declared to be an emergency measure necessary for the immediate preservation of the public peace, property, health, safety, and welfare of the city, and for the further reason that this ordinance is required to be immediately effective in order to issue and sell the bonds, which is necessary to enable the city to take advantage of favorable interest rates and realize a savings in interest costs by refunding the refunded bonds, and to coordinate the sale of the bonds with other bonds of the city. Wherefore, this ordinance shall be enforced in effect immediately upon its passage.
Could you say that again?
Could you please pass that tonight?
How many breaths was that?
Mr. Stelzer.
Thank you. Had some previous discussion about this refunding of this bond issue. These bonds were originally issued to fund the initial $20 million worth of improvements from our Parks and Rec income tax that was passed in 2008, I believe. When we issued the original bonds, we did have a call provision that allowed us to call the bonds June 1st, 2020. Bond legislation law allows us to do that 90 days in advance of the call date. So we've kind of laid out a calendar that moves us through a refunding issue. The math behind it, the interest rates, the savings, all that is pretty significant. We had some discussion, I think earlier in the year with the Finance Committee related to some sewer bonds that we refunded earlier in the year. Still makes a lot of sense from this issue standpoint. If we don't refund the bond, we could always do it at some point down the road, but the existing debt that's outstanding matures in 2034. Interest rate, I indicated in my memo, the remaining interest rates on those bonds is about 4.465%. Right now, we're looking at a new structure that's going to be a 7-year non-callable issue. I tried to match that up with projecting when I think our income tax will collect enough money to pay it off, and to have the maturities on these be as short as possible to help the interest rates. I didn't initially indicated 1.93, but it'll probably be closer to 1.5%, the interest that we'll pay on the 7-year bonds. Fortunately for some people, and perhaps Darren, because I believe he bought some of these bonds back in when they were issued, we're gonna refund. He's not going to get his 4% interest anymore unless he finds another investment. But actually, the net present value on the savings over that time period is a little more than $2 million, not an insignificant amount. And it's such that, along with the cash flow associated with our income tax, more than likely right now, I would say there's a pretty good chance by the end of 2024 we'll be able to extinguish the tax. Now, the bonds we're issuing won't mature until 2026, but that doesn't mean we can't extinguish the tax. Once the ordinance that we passed when we adopted that tax indicated the tax will be in place until December 31st of the year in which either all cost or debt issued associated with it is paid off. That's not going to be an exact date, but more than likely, pretty confident it'll probably be 2024. Did push the bonds back just in case. We had some major issues and our tax revenues came in slower. But what we'll end up doing, if that is the case, we'd set aside, or Justin, whoever's here at the time, would set aside those funds in basically a reserve account and then use it to pay them off, and then the bonds would mature in 2026. There will be more than likely a residual amount of tax collected, and had some discussion in the past, had some discussion with Tom. That residual tax will, let's just say, that we collect enough as of June of a given tax year. Again, we can't just turn off the tax, so we'll continue to collect taxes through the remainder of that year, even from employers in town. And then people file their individual returns, and some will pay, a lot will pay by April of the next year. And there's going to be money collected for the next probably 5 or 6 years as people that are delinquent in filing their taxes. If they file it 3 or 4 years after the tax extinguished, that doesn't mean you don't have to pay it. If they have to file a 2019 return, they're going to have to pay that tax. So we'll continue to collect that amount of money. Could be fairly substantial, as much as $2 million. If for lucky in the timing, it might be as little as $300,000, $400,000, $500,000. We are somewhat limited on what we can use those funds for. I think they need to be used, for the purpose for which the tax was originally put in place, which is constructing and rehabilitating park facilities in the city. When we were originally kicking around how to structure that debt, one of the things I was hoping to do was kind of setting aside a maintenance fund, because it's great we got that money to build all these facilities, but as you know, we still struggle paying for some of those discretionary type of services. And I think we determined at the time it probably was outside the scope of the ballot language. But with this residual funds, doesn't mean we have to, but I would suggest that some of those monies be put aside to deal with, if we have issues at the indoor facility at some point down the road, major facility maintenance issues, who knows, the splash pad, some of the other bigger park assets that we have, because we really don't have a lot of available funding on a operating year in year out basis to take care of big ticket maintenance items, and I think that would be an allowable use of those funds. But other than that, I think it's we do have a calendar I kind of put forward that has us moving through and actually pricing the bonds before the end of the January, before I'd actually leave. Then it would close in March, which gets us to the 90 days in advance of the June 1st call date. So entertain any questions you may have related to the refunding issue or park levy or anything.
Any questions? I'm just thankful that you're thinking ahead to get this done. I appreciate it a
Sure.
lot.
And I don't see any reason to continue to delay this.
I think it makes sense.
$2 million, let's,
I'm gonna move that we waive the rules requiring three readings on ordinance 19-80.
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Schaefer, a second by Mrs. Keller. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Keller?
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Farrell?
Yes.
Mr. Hellinger?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Schaefer?
Yes.
Mayor Riggle?
Yes.
Move for the approval of ordinance 1980.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Schaefer, second by Mrs. Keller. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Is this for the emergency clause? I'm sorry.
I did not approve, but I will recommend the approval of the emergency clause on ordinance 19-80.
Second.
Okay.
Kinda wanted to hear her read it again, but that's all right.
Motion by Mr. Schaefer on the emergency clause, second by Mrs. Keller. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Keller?
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Farrell?
Yes.
Mr. Hellinger?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Schaefer?
Yes.
Mayor Riggle?
Yes.
And I will now move for approval of 1980.
Second again.
Motion by Mr. Schaefer, second by Mrs. Keller. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Keller?
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Farrell?
Yes.
Mr. Hellinger?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Schaefer?
Yes.
Mayor Riggle?
Yes, motion carries. Okay, so we're gonna, what?
Got through quite a bit.
We did. So now we're gonna go back up and take care of budget. Does anybody need a break before we, let's take a 5-minute break? Is that okay with everyone? And then we'll go back up in here from Finance, City, and Legal. Legal. Okay, so we'll be back at 8:11. We'll come back at 8:16.
message from Chris?
I don't know, I stepped over there, so back.
He said he's been left to the hospital for a CT scan to check out the lesion.
Oh. Yeah.
So I told him to keep us updated as he, you know, I'm sure his hands are full.
Back to order. And I think first on the agenda is finance.
Rob Elger, I think, is going to present.
Wow. I don't know, Dean, can you sit in that seat?
I'll keep it.
You keep what?
I'll keep it.
Okay.
Step on his foot here. That's what that means.
I can? Sorry. Go ahead. Ignore her.
Madam Mayor, members of council, good evening. Here to talk about the 2020 budget. And I don't have a long monologue to give, and I'm not even sure what happened up here. Okay. As you know, the city finance department, we pretty much take care of all the money coming into the city, all the money going out to the city, or from the city. We handle the utility department, income tax department, payroll, accounts payable for all of the departments within the city. So all the budget numbers that you see flow one way or the other through our divisions of the finance department. Dave, what's going on with our TV?
We're working on it.
Okay. Look over here.
Might be better.
Currently, we don't have any personnel additions. Last year, we added a part-time clerical specialist. Once we renovate City Hall, the clerical specialist will be moving downstairs and they'll be handling a lot of the cashiering, hopefully consolidating where everyone can pay pretty much any bills that go out of the city and accordingly. Pass through here. So significant line items, if everyone's following me here so far. Wages and benefits are increasing for 2020 due to the retirement of this gentleman next to me. And postage is increasing next year. We're changing the way we send out a lot of our tax delinquency notices. They're all going to be certified. What that will do is that will then enable us, if people don't pay their delinquent taxes, the Attorney General's office will be able to step in. And we're hoping once they get a letter from them, they'll pay a little faster. The refunds were up in 2019 because of the recent changes in House Bill 5, right, Dean? And so those increases carry over into 2020 also. New initiatives. We just went live with some new tax software on the 3rd of this month, and I have just a few of the highlights up there. Now you can electronically register with the tax department. You can file your return, make payments including installments, and securely upload like your W-2 and other tax information without having to email it or even bring it in. So Lori, who was here earlier, very excited about this. We have several hundred of ACH payments that are coming in, and all of this new technology that we're installing and implementing will greatly help her department with that. The other big initiative, which I'm the project manager on, is a new ERP system, whole new software system for the entire city for payroll and financial accounting and whatnot. No more yellow time cards.
I was just gonna ask you that.
That's still a couple years down the road.
4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Operational.
But that'll change the way that we send invoices out, take payments in, make payments out, enter your time, etc. We're very excited about this. This has been a couple years in the making, and it's still going to be a couple years down the road. But it's really going to change the information that our citizens can get online from the city, and just the way that we do business in general. So that's all I had, Dean.
Just a couple other things to reiterate that change is pretty substantial, and I think it'll really enable us to provide better access to citizens. We're going down that path like a lot of places. A lot of our transactions are going to be electronic. That takes more than just software that enables that. It takes, I think, staff that are capable of looking at things in a little bit different light. One of the things, bigger change that we've had, and I mentioned that a few times in the past, we've transitioned quite a few staff positions, a lot of them retirements and whatever in the last 3 or 4 years. I think it was like 9 full-time staff. And I think we've got a real good group of people. You know, I was trying to focus in on people that are analytical, that can work a little bit differently, because just like with the time card information, yeah, it's one thing whether we have those cards, but now we're going to be in a situation where we're going to be somewhat dependent on employees to properly enter their information. Well, instead of somebody having a card and being able to review that, they're going to have to know what the software is and how to put checks and balances from an electronic standpoint to monitor the accuracy. Because we have a lot of different ways that people can get paid, and some pretty involved issues related to that. So as Rob said, we have been kind of setting the table. We've gone through a pretty lengthy process. Part of that was intended to really get people in the department to understand what these tools can do for them. Their jobs are changing. I mean, they're changing everywhere. You know, the days of us just hiring people to take payments from people and process checks and all that are changing. And people are going to have to be able to adapt with that. So I think that'll be an important asset. It does get a lot outside the just the finance department in general. The ERP system is about a citywide database. You know, the analytics, being able to pull more information and use information to make informed decisions, hopefully. So that'll take a while for people to get accustomed to, but I think we've got a good tool. And I know our future finance directors had quite a bit of experience working with the software system that we selected, so I think that'll be good. Now that police department will be on that similar platform, so I think it'll work well down the road.
And if I can add, we're discussing with Justin for a little bit tonight, and our intention is to revamp our chart of accounts. We put the programmatic budget on hiatus for a couple of years because we didn't really have a good software system to track for each of the activities that our departments do. So with this new ERP system coming in, we will be able to track not only the expenditures but the associated revenues to support those. So that's another thing that we are excited about. So it's hard to get excited about accounting.
One other comment, I think, and once we get all the building changes made, you know, a big part of that's security issues, and that will change how people interact with the department downstairs. Fortunately, we're going to have to put up more barriers, so to speak, but we're hoping also to incorporate, not just because of software, but more ways for people to pay and do things, not just online, some kiosks 24 we're going to convert our game plan is to convert the drive-up window. You got to staff it to put in a 24/7, almost like an ATM where people can go in and not just pay their utility bill, but hopefully pay a parking fine or do whatever else, and not have to come down during business hours. So I think that'll be a bit of a change too for everybody. That's it. I don't know if you had any questions.
You can't be done.
I get to come back in a little bit here after.
I have like an hour set aside for you.
That's going to take at least 45 minutes.
Any questions for Robert? All right. Thank you very much.
So for my budget, I'm going to defer to Mr. Yocum. There's really not a lot of changes in the city manager's budget, with the exception of a recommendation to convert a part-time position that we put in place in 2019 and that we've gotten tremendous value from to full-time, and I think Lee can elaborate on that. So.
Yeah. Mayor, members of council, I'm Lee Yocum. I'm the Communications Affairs Coordinator for the city. In the proposed budget is a recommendation that the communications specialist position be realigned from part-time to full-time. We've seen some excellent work out of the person that's in that position in the 6 months they've been here, and we're very excited for some things we have planned for 2020 for the position. So, and the first three I'm particularly anxious to get started on. Beginning, we're going to do some with this position, we're going to really do some video storytelling, and especially as it pertains to economic development, getting out in our community, and not just in the downtown, but all over our community to kind of tell our story, and then use our channels that we already have, that already exist, to promote that. And I think we can create some real momentum and some synergy as far as economic development and just promoting the city as the perception that we are a good partner, that we're interested in promoting our businesses, and then we're interested in promoting the fact that the city of Delaware is a pretty great place to be. So that's part of the plan for one of the things we want to do. I mean, right now, I think we could probably do 6 to 8 of these videos a year. We're going to work on some ways to measure the analytics and the success of those, but very excited to get started on that, and this position would really help with that. Another thing we're going to do is a website facelift. We've already begun that. One of the real assets of the person that's of Dale Oates, who's in the position, is his familiarity with WordPress, which is what our website is based off of, and just the intuitive knowledge that he has when it comes to the back end of a website. So we're using him right now to fix some things, working with IT, and then in 2020 we're going to do a website facelift, working with what we have, but we can do it in-house, which will be a savings to the city, not having to source that out. And then the third thing is, as I said, more video storytelling. And that is one of my goals in community affairs, is to provide the information in a way that our residents want to receive it. And right now, that's with video. And I think we're meeting that goal now, but we can exceed it, I think, with this position, with this realignment. So I'm very excited about that. Dale also, as you probably know, has some pretty advanced drone experience, and we're able now to have that as an asset for the city, and we plan to do some drone training in 2020 with Dale, helping out other departments so they too can take advantage of that technology, be it engineering or public works with some of our road projects. It could be with our public safety, it could be with code enforcement or something like that. So we're going to roll that out in 2020. So very excited. Just a really good person in that position now, and looking forward to the future with it. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
One slide.
I know.
Thought my 4 was pretty awful. Madam Mayor, members of council, I apologize if I'm a little froggy. I'm just fighting baby.
Yeah, whatever you guys have with this crud, just keep it,
I blame
okay?
Parker because she is just infecting me continuously, but I
How's
feel
he
great
doing?
otherwise. So anyway, my budget is one of the, actually probably the smallest in the whole city, but I do want to let you know what's going on in our department. Organizational chart, we have one personnel change. It's called, this is basically our file clerk position. You funded this position for a number of years. It's a part-time position. We've had it as an internship. That internship is geared towards someone with special needs or work training requirements. The person we've had in it since you've been funding it is from the Alpha Group, but we don't necessarily limit it to that. And we kind of looked at it and said, you really can't be on an internship for 5 years. That's kind of a farce. So all we did was convert it to a permanent part-time position, same number of hours. I think based on the changing from the intern pay plan to the slot in the permanent part-time, I think it costs under $20 difference. So it does not impact the budget, but we wanted to reflect the reality of what we were doing instead of kind of pretending we were doing an internship. But that's a vital part of our office. It does that kind of work that allows our administrative staff to focus on the other parts of that office. Last year, you gave me a paralegal position. I thought it'd just be fair to tell you kind of what we were doing. I was embarrassed last year when you asked me, how many public records requests do you have and how long does it take? Because I had no system. Now I have that system. Since she's been here on March to a couple days ago, we had 55 requests. This is separate from the ones that the police department handles. They handle their own requests, and our average response time is 5.43 days. I can tell you that's way better than when I was doing it myself, because I think as Councilman Rohr, when he was here, said, why is Darren handling these public records requests? It was the least important thing when I'm handling a big lawsuit or responding to a legal issue for council. So Doreen has been excellent about keeping on it and following up. She also, speaking of following up, she has added a project tracking system in the department. You know, I'm kind of a one-man band over here with civil, especially now that Chris Ballard has left. And so when the huge time-sensitive emergency comes in, other things tend to get bumped to the wayside. So she's tracking those, so she circles back with me to make sure they're following. And anecdotally, I could tell you that our response time has improved. There hasn't been anything that's fallen through the cracks. We never missed a deadline, but people are getting responses a lot quicker. So I believe we're getting our bang for our buck from that position. That is a permanent part-time position. New initiatives in my budget, aside from my $20 or under change, I requested an increase in our publication line item. Right now, our publications is mostly Westlaw, LexisNexis. They both provide case law research. There's a product called Practical Law. That's an upgrade on Westlaw, and it goes beyond just the case law and the statutes that you get with legal research on Westlaw, and provides checklists, sample statutes, practice notes on areas of law that we don't deal with very often. And it should make my life easier, because one of the things I do as city attorney is handle the next weird thing that comes up. Hey, we need to regulate drones, we need to regulate scooters, we need to regulate massage issues, and I have to go learn a whole new area of law. Or when I had Chris Ballard, he would do it, and when I have my new prosecutor, he or she could do it. So this would allow us to quickly learn those new areas, get samples, templates, checklists on these new areas of law. It'll be particularly helpful when that next prosecutor comes over to help, because whether it's one of my internal people there or the next person I'm hiring, we're currently interviewing, none of them have any civil experience, so they will be learning. So having this sort of resource guide to give you short primers on law, checklists, things like that will get them up to speed and helping us more. We were also demoing solutions for public record solutions, which would streamline that operation. We had a meeting today with IT, and we think we might be able to use a software package that they're buying for another purpose that will save us some money, but we did put that in our budget as well. Finally, I know at prior meetings, I think it was Councilman Schaefer, but maybe it might have been other council members, wanted to ask about our service grade explanation, why we graded ourselves that. I have to say that council has been very generous with my budget. I try not to ask for very much, but I've never been rebuffed either by Tom's process or by council. So I didn't have anything where I said we are failing because we don't have the resources. But I thought it'd be worth explaining why I graded some of our things as exceeding expectations. You may recall a few years ago we added that fourth prosecutor. One of their duties was to handle the municipal income tax collection cases. I wrote that is exceeding expectations because this year our filings and collections have increased from prior years. We did have our first jury trial, which was, I took it, it was weird. We also streamlined the process in 2019 between us and the finance department to kind of make less staff time for both. And we're exploring new ways to approach the cases. Maybe we go for civil collections. Maybe we do other things. Maybe we use the Attorney General's office to do some of the collections. So we're exploring new ways to approach those cases, but based on the collections and our staffing, that's been a standout area. I also put diversions exceeding expectations. That's another position that council added for me. That was the first new one we got. We continue to exceed the diversion fees versus the cost of the position, so it pays for itself and then more. But also it's been really effective at moving cases off that criminal docket, because essentially the defendant says, I want to enter this program up front. I don't have to go through the pre-trials, the pleading, and if they fail out of the program, they've already pled guilty. So my prosecutors and the judges don't have to touch it again. So it takes work off that on that back end. And actually it's a better result for the defendants and the victims. If the victims have monetary loss, part of the program to get through is you got to pay them back, so they get their money more likely than a criminal conviction. And the defendants, this is their first time offense. They're not bad people. This is sort of their one chance to kind of turn back on the right path, and it doesn't give them a record. So everyone kind of wins. Finally, I wrote that the prosecutor's office is exceeding expectations. This is primarily because we've been short-staffed for 90% of the year. Ever since Melissa left and brought some people with her, we're still short-staffed. We're hiring now. And so they've been continuing to do quality work, having that good reputation. And in fact, I've received positive feedback from the judges, which I'm used to, victims, which I'm used to. But sometimes I get surprised when a defendant actually writes to us and says, I want to just appreciate how I was treated by the prosecutor's office. So that kind of means a lot to me, because it's not about doing, getting convictions, about doing the right thing. So that speaks well to our office. So I wrote the exceed expectations, and that's not a council thing. They're just, their resources have been less because we just haven't had the people. Council's funded it. I just have had people leave. So I'd be happy to answer any questions about our budget, our department, or our service level grade.
Can you think of some areas recently where, just getting standard cases in Westlaw, if you would have had Westlaw Edge and all the other stuff they provide on that would have helped you?
Yes. And these are kind of the greatest hits of things that council and my department has had in the past couple of years. Recently, we were asked to manage massage parlor legislation. I think we had maybe one or two in the city. I had never looked at that law before. There was intertwined some First Amendment concerns about signage and posting. Westerville had done a draft, and so the natural instinct was, let's just copy Westerville's, but we created ours whole cloth. So how to regulate massage parlors would have been an area that we could have looked at the primers, the how-tos, the things to check out. Signage. This is an issue that Dave and I have been struggling with, but there was a recent case called Reed versus the town of Gilbert. It's not recent anymore. Was it 3 years now? But it basically said, it used to, if you look at our code, we have all these things that say if it's a real estate sign, you can do this. If it's a church sign, you can do this. If it's a for money sign, you can do that. And this Supreme Court case basically said, if you have to look at the words on the sign, you can't treat it differently based on the words. So our sign code technically is probably unconstitutional. We've been not enforcing it in a way that would minimize our risk. But this is an issue that cities across the country have been dealing with. Every conference I go to, they talk about, and that would be an area where practical law would say, maybe here's a draft to revise sign code, or here are some do's and don'ts, or here's the things to watch out for. So if I were going to give, Chris Ballard or a new prosecutor, hey, your job is to kind of work on this code revision, that would get them up to speed way faster than, someone who already knew the code law. Because Dave and I have been working on this, but it's just one of these big bites. Other examples are scooter regulation. It went from everyone wanted to ban them to now everyone wants to attract them. Drones is a hot topic. These are all areas of law where I have to go Uber, Airbnbs, I have to go research and figure out what can we do, what are the rules, how are they treating it, whereas this does provide some summaries, has some checklists, has some samples that could help us. So those are the examples I can think of right now. And honestly, I'd be fine without it if it was just me and maybe Chris was still here, but I'm going to have a new person who's literally never done any civil before, and it's going to take them a year to be valuable, and by then they might move on. That just seems to be the way it works over here. So good question. Does that answer it?
Yes.
Any other questions?
By way of, just to give you a little bit more detail, I think it ends up being another 10 to 20,000 a year. It's not tons, but it's not free.
Yeah.
And we might be able to negotiate with them as well.
So your job is to keep your prosecutors then. Don't let any more go.
It's a good point. Obviously, for the new members, our city prosecutor went to become county prosecutor, which is good, and I really can't falter for that. she did us the solid of recognizing we had a really good staff and took 2 of them with her to her staff, so I lost them. So it was a weird circumstance. We are taking our time to fill it because we want the right people, and we did a round and we got 1, but we couldn't really find the other one, so we're getting close. We'll be full, and I think we'll be okay for at least, I don't know, 4 days.
Okay.
Thank you.
Very much. Do you have anything else? I know we're going to talk about this community grant fund, I think, a little bit.
With that, and I know Dean passed something out he'd like to go over, I just really wanted to make sure if there are any additions. There was some discussion at the last meeting about adding a couple of things, so we can talk about that now if you'd like, or after Dean's done. I just want to get a recap so that when we present the final budget to you next week, that it reflects accurately what you have you've arrived at consensus on. And I think one of those was traffic calming, and there's a couple of other things, but we can come back to that.
Yeah, that discussion now.
Yeah, if you want. If we, what I from last week, what my notes indicate, what Alicia passed out is an additional $19,000 to be appropriated to provide additional traffic calming per the Parking and Safety Committee recommendations. So I believe it's an additional 19,000, unless Bill's got some good news and it's not.
An additional 19,000 will raise the total allocation to 39,000 for traffic calming, which could all be spent in early January on just the traffic calming that we've already identified for past projects, which would leave $0 for traffic calming in 2020 if something else were to come up.
Well,
but the 19,000 would, in addition to the 20 shown in the budget, would cover past discussion and commitments.
And I think that was our concern, is that parking and safety had looked at these streets and deemed that there was a critical need. We'd like to see that happen.
Right, so this covers Cobblestone,
Carson Farms,
and
Executive.
Executive, and so that's, I think at that point, if it gets to the point in 2020 that the Parking and Safety Committee is entertaining additional recommendations from staff or from the public, then you'll have to consider adjusting the appropriation, just indicating it's going to have to wait. But I think this is a pretty major step forward from where we were just a year ago, less than a year ago. So that's the one area, and we can make that adjustment. It's not going to, that's not going to move the needle significantly. I think we can handle that. The other was the demolition of the condominium in connection with the extension of Valley Side Drive at some point in the future. There seemed to be consensus to go ahead and do that. I think what we're going to try to do is identify an appropriation this year yet, and try to get that under contract so it doesn't have to reflect in the 2020 budget. So I'll work with our staff on that.
And that was 12,000, right?
Yes, that was the estimate, right. So I'll have Jerry Warner and Charles Dukes get that put into our system, and that would then show up as a part of our supplemental appropriation that would be placed before you next week. Regarding a couple of other items, one is we had recommended an appropriation in 2020 for replacement of the playscape at Mingo, approximately $200,000. Ted is indicating to me that the price is going to go up on that in 2020, so if we can again appropriate those dollars in 2019, we avoid that price increase. So that would mean we'd have to make an adjustment in the 2020 budget, adjust that appropriation downward. So that would probably be reflected as well in the supplemental appropriation that you would be getting next week, but I think that makes sense. Then there were a couple of other projects that have come to our attention regarding East William Street and some of these others, capital projects that will probably have to wait until the CIP amendment that we would be placing before you in January. Another one of those projects would be the Bruce Road, Pennsylvania trail extension that we discussed, that we reviewed last week. Corey, you weren't here, but we did supply some background information about the cost of that. I was on It was about 50.
The gravel, I think, was 58.
Yeah.
58,000.
Kind of an unimproved surface would be
Yeah.
about $58,000, so we would, I think our recommendation would be, when we look at the update of the 2020 CIP that we'd hopefully be dealing with in January, that we'd be including that at the same time, as well as possible adjustments to the East William Street project. That project, as Bill knows, it's just, it's going pretty well, but there's just been some changes that I think you can elaborate that had to have been made in the field, and
Yeah, it's really going really well, and it's on target for expenditure. It's just we don't typically put 10% contingencies. It's pretty typical on projects as part of the budget, but things do happen along the way, and you need to have some available funding, both for construction, administration, inspection, and just construction items that come up. So we're still within all the parameters of a large capital project like this. We just don't pre-fund those to those high levels. And then we can manage it, like we said, in a CIP adjustment in January to capture those costs. But in general, the project is coming in pretty well on target.
so that's, that really pretty much is the extent of the comments that we received from council. And if there's consensus on those, then that would be reflected in the budget appropriation ordinance.
Amended
We-
appropriation.
The amended appropriation ordinance. Dean would put that together. That would be included next week when we send the packet out, together with the supplemental appropriation. So I don't know if there are any others. I know Councilwoman Keller had mentioned something about community promotions, and you had mentioned that earlier, and you also mentioned something about risk management with respect to the city and some of the special events.
Oh, yes, thank you for reminding me.
Hang on,
So-
how much on East William we're looking at? East William Street? I don't have a number.
Well, funding the second part of the inspection in 2020 would be $250,000 to keep our inspection crew out there and a testing crew out there. Our
250,000?
Consultants, 250,000, right.
Wow.
I wasn't expecting that, but okay.
Coming out of CIP, right?
That would be part of the CIP adjustment.
Okay.
Yeah, we have full-time inspector, full-time construction manager, and testing out there on it. And these are costs that are anywhere from $80 or $60 an hour to $120, $130 an hour. Expensive costs. But again, well within the normal parameters we see on large projects like this. The other one would be additional costs for some additional water line work we had to do out there, and some additional pavement work out there, temporary pavement work. And we had additional $150,000 over what was already established in the CIP for 2020, which was, I believe, $100,000. So $150,000 additional there on the construction as well.
One of the things that's important related to those type of projects isn't just whether it's in the CIP or wherever it's at, is at some point we make an informed decision to go ahead and do a project. And on that scale, it's different than a $50,000 resurfacing issue. You know, it's a multi-million-dollar project. And that one kind of had a little bit of its life of its own. There was, mostly grant funded, and there was a point in time where we thought it was going to be exclusively grant funded. So whether it's in the CIP or whether the issue to us is we don't have to put discretionary funds on the table. I think we've gotten to that point right up until the bid, and the bids came back a little $1 million over what we anticipated. So now we were back into, if I recall correctly, about $700,000 of city money.
It's like $780 or so.
So regardless of whether we put in an appropriation contingencies, that's that number. And I don't know, Bill, with these changes, whether that pushes our $700,000 up above that.
Yeah, it will. Yep.
And in doing so, then that means, again, if it is $300,000-400,000, when our other capital funds are already committed, other than allocating more money, discretionary money out of our general fund, we either have to look at some of the other projects, either hold off or adjust from that standpoint. And that's one of those things Tom referenced it when I get into talking a little bit about our management policies, financial management policies, and talk a little bit about what we need to do come the first part of the year. So.
Thank you.
Like Mr. Holman mentioned, I had a suggestion about the parade fees for the Veterans Parade and the 4th of July Parade. It can be burdensome to the organizers of the parades to pay for the liability insurance that the city requires. And so I had a suggestion that perhaps that would be something that the city could cover on behalf of those two parades, because they bring so much to the city and are just an important part of who we are as a city, celebrating our independence and our veterans.
Well, the reason these two parades in particular is because they're both citizen-led.
Yes.
There's no organization behind them. It's just somebody stepped up and said, I won't let the parade die, I'll take it over. And I just think it's horrible if they have to then go out and find money to pay for the insurance. So from what I understand, this year the insurance was about $490 some for each parade. So.
Yeah, what I indicated was we would check with our risk managers and our insurance company and just make sure that was okay to the extent that we're sponsoring, co-sponsor. What I don't want to do is set a precedent. Obviously, there are a lot of other events that we have in the city of Delaware, most of which we require them to name us as an additional insured. These tend to be a little different because of the nature of how they're organized and just that from that standpoint. But
and if I might chime in, I apologize, Madam Mayor, members of council. One of the reasons we might not want to do that came up a few years ago when people wanted to be in the parade that people disagreed with. When it's a government-sponsored parade, we can't say it's okay. It's not okay to have the Confederate flag or the whatever horrible things we don't like. And so the solution was it's a private parade. They can do whatever they want. As Tom mentioned, if we take on some form of city sponsorship of that, we might risk not having that ability to do that because, hey, this is a city parade. I want to come in here and do what I want to do. So there's no legal reason why you can't, but that issue that came up a few years ago where people were coming to city council meetings and complaining, that could arise again. So I just want to make council aware of that before you make the decision that you're certainly allowed to do it, but it would become that would be the risk that could happen.
So if they got their money out of the community foundation, they actually went for it that way. Are you looking at the same way?
The Delaware Community Foundation?
No, the
Community Promotions
Community Promotions.
The Community Promotions Fund is tax dollars we get, I believe, from the hotel tax.
Right.
We've just decided to put it in this grant, so I could do more research into it and find out, but my initial thing, there's a pretty strong risk of it. Now, if they got it from the Delaware Community Foundation through donations or whatever grant they have, that's not a government body, that's just a grant, so that would definitely not be, so.
Well, one of the things related to that is again, before we even talked about the whole thing with the Confederate flag, the issue is there don't have resources to pay. And one of the things I was going to indicate is that even if we did pay for it, they perhaps individually, if they're involved, might have some exposure and they might not be covered under our policy of sorts. You know, if something happens and we're a part of it, or it happens in the city or whatever else, and our people were a part of it, whether we considered it a private event or not, we're probably going to get sued. And so we have existing coverages that protects the city for those sort of things. So what happens to these other entities? Could they personally get sued? Well, you know, we're not going to be their attorneys, and they could probably check. We don't want to dissuade people from volunteering their time or whatever the entity might be. You know, one of those notions is if we just pay for their policy as if they were to get it, if it just becomes a funding issue, regardless of what fund we take it out of. I mean, we provide money to the Arts Council out of that fund. What if the Arts Council gets involved in an issue regarding a Confederate flag? You know, do we have the same concerns? Are we indirectly, because we help fund that entity, responsible for their actions? I'm sure there's a way to craft those sort of things. That whole, what ends up happening is more a matter of what's proper form. And you know, the thing that happened a couple of years ago, I don't know if anybody anticipated, but that can always happen, as it's going to get sued. But if it's just a financial issue, because there's a reason, it's not just to put that burden on these people to, you know, they should, because things can happen, and you'd hate to see somebody, an entity, whoever it was, providing a nice event, and they end up getting sued too, and whatever else. So it's just prudent to have some of that. Whether we elect to provide money indirectly to some, you know, to pay some of those premiums, you know, again, you could go through the community foundation and say, because there isn't a body that you know, a nonprofit entity that's actually on paper that does the Christmas parade or the July 4th parade. You know, there's probably ways around that.
If I could just chime in, not to take away from the significance of those parades, but from my past experience in the city, when you start making those exceptions, it opens the door for a lot of things to happen. As much as we'd like to help the people out, my recommendation is that we don't have those become city-sponsored events, because now the next person that comes along is going to ask for that same thing, and if we don't give it to them, we've got a problem.
But could they apply, could they apply for a grant to offset their cost for that? I think that might be the way to approach it, is that they just become an applicant, and that these are not expensive.
Using
using community promotions fund.
Well, what
as
would be the
opposed-
difference if we use that fund or we just?
Well, I think as Dean was indicating, you're just helping them defray their cost of.
Right, I don't think it makes
their
any difference what
insurance.
fund we use, whether we use that, it's all city money, that's discretionary money. We happen to set it aside and use it for these purposes, but we wouldn't have to.
So when somebody else comes along and wants to have a parade, they're gonna ask us to do the same thing. And we don't have any legal standing, I don't think, to tell them no.
Well, they would apply for the same thing everybody else did. They would have to apply for it if we use this.
You'd have to make some you'd have to distinguish, because you have a lot of special events, and you don't want the horse parade to say.
The
"We're
horse
not-"
parade has their own funding.
No, I
Main
understand.
Street has their own fund.
Right.
Yeah, but but to the point, yes, you can't, it's how you slice and dice, so either you're gonna open it up to everyone, or you can't open it up to anyone.
Anyone could apply for this, if we do it through this, and it's up to the committee whether they fund it or not.
Well, but at least how it's written today is, it's not to go to operational expense, which is what insurance is.
Yeah, but, I mean, if that's the case, then we're breaking our own rules every time that we
Yeah.
dole out this money with all the organizations that we already have, it's going to operations. I mean, I think we need to change the guidelines.
Yes, because SWCI uses it for that.
Right.
We heard from the Arts Council tonight, they do.
And it would just seem silly to me, I was thinking about the way that we've divided up some of the money. Not saying that it will happen, but let's say that we don't fund the Arts Castle because, we just determined that it's not going to go to ongoing operations, but then, you know, we fund Sister City or something like that. I mean, what a shame it would be to see something like the Arts Castle close and then fund something else. It just seems like we need to revise the community promotions.
But to me, that's a separate issue than deciding to pay for liability insurance for 2 parades and not the rest.
Yes.
I mean, surely those organizations could raise donations for $400, I would think.
It's not an organization, it's an individual, it's a citizen that came forward and said, I won't let it die, I'll put it on.
Yeah, and in
And
these
then
cases.
we required them to have to go out and pay for insurance.
I mean, I understand, I'm sympathetic to that, I'm just looking at it
Yeah,
from.
then I can see them both going away.
Darren, can you comment a little bit about, so if we have the parade and we're paying for it, and then, so now it's happening, whoever's sponsoring it or whoever's running it, but then somebody else wants to come in with a different viewpoint, and we want to say no because we're the city, then it's a viewpoint discrimination, which you can't do.
Right.
But we, as the city, have an ability to engage in discretionary viewpoint appropriations of the sort that she's talking about through this community support fund or what have you. So is it basically just a matter of form as to if we're going to open it up, then we can't restrict the content, or we have to be the discriminatory of the discriminate based on the content and how we allocate the money?
That's a very good question. This community promotions fund it's not supposed to be kind of viewpoint specific, so we're not supposed to be, it's got criteria, they're scored on the criteria, it's supposed to be based on people coming in and, you know, the self-sufficiency, at least this is the way it was, not for operations, so it's not supposed to discriminate against we like you, we don't like your view.
Yeah.
To your second point, once we open up that parade is now a public forum, like you said, because it's a city parade, and that's where we can't discriminate and say the forum's open for the parade, we like you, you know, you like America folks, but we don't like you protesters, you know, burning flags folks. So that's where we get into trouble if we have a parade. We can certainly have parades, we can sponsor them, we can do it, and I think it went fine for years and years in the city of Delaware. We just had a particular issue where someone got into a parade, and I don't even think anyone thought to tell them no, and people were offended by it, and you know, I did the research and said we can't prevent that from happening when it's a city parade. And I think that's when the people stepped up and kind of said, well, we're going to do the parade and we can do it ourselves. So if they get their permit now, to follow up to the question you didn't ask, if the next person comes in and says, I want to have my parade for this horrible subject that nobody likes, we can't tell them no. They have to have their parade. So they can have their own. We can't tell them, well, we can't, you know, that happened in the Skokie case where the KKK wanted to march and they made them do it. Now we can put in restrictions like we need to make sure you have security and you follow the right route, but we couldn't tell them no parade for you. But if it's private, they can put who they want in it. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
You know, and those are really kind of regulation types of issues. The original discussion was about paying for liability insurance and naming the city as an additional insured. That all came about in the early 90s because of the big, you know, things were changing with our sovereign immunity, and all the insurance aiding people out there were recommending you're subject to getting sued. And if you've got anything going on in your community of sorts, you need to pay attention to it and make sure if there's some potential risk that you have those, whoever's doing it, buy a policy and name the city as an additional insured. And so then that created this you know, whatever. And I think even the insurance and the city's vulnerabilities to getting sued. I mean, we just had the accident with the triathlon, or I mean, it's pretty substantial. Now, to my knowledge, now it may be coming at some point down the road. I'm not aware that the city got sued. You'd think, you know, just like that. So maybe at some point that may need to be revisited. And I know we have some consultants that assist us that look at the city's liability from certain things like that to occur. How often are they going to get sued? And is it still prudent for us to request all these events to have liability insurance and name us? Is there a way to protect the city? You know, arguably it's not a responsibility to protect the individual people doing these, but if we can get some consensus on that, it may not be quite so much of an issue. You know, that fund, community fund, whatever we want, created that several years ago because that's a discretionary revenue. It's hotel tax. We can spend it on whatever. We used to have, at budget time, lengthy debates about whether this group should get $2,000, and it was all coming out of the general fund. There was no separate fund. So those monies are no different than our income tax money from what the source is and what we can do with it. Again, we created that fund so that there was more of a focused look at it, and the source of the money was hotel tax, and a lot of places turned that over to the tourism board to support things related to events in the community. And so, you know, again, whether we do or we don't pay for some sort of a insurance policy for events, you know, it doesn't make any difference whether it's there. That doesn't change the nature of what's involved. I think the one thing yet that this thing is a, you know, if it's a July 4th or a Christmas parade, more of a city type of event. I think there's a lot of communities that the cities just put those on. Right. Yeah. And is there a way to distinguish between that and something else, a car show or this or that are not traditionally kind of community things? There's nothing precludes us from putting on the Christmas parade, whether we want to or not, or whether somebody wants to be burdened with the organizational side of that, but doesn't change the risk. We would be insured. We wouldn't have to get somebody else to provide additional insurance on top of that.
Just to explain what that phrase talks about, get an insurance policy, naming us as an insured, what that means is they buy an insurance policy. Usually, I think we require $1 million. If someone gets hit in a parade and sues us, basically it's covered by that policy, and because we're named as an additional insured, they have to defend us. So we don't have to mess with in theory, mess with our insurance policy, pay for our deductibles, pay for that stuff. They've got to cover us. This has only come into play one time that I can remember since I've been here. The YMCA names us as additional insured because of the management of the pool. And, you know, one of the high school kids they had running the slide let somebody go down backwards and they got hurt and they sued us. And so we use that policy to get them to, you know, work it out. That's the only time I've ever seen it triggered. As Dean says, we do have insurance. We can say it's covered by our insurance, but it's level of protection where we don't have to tap into taxpayer dollars if something happens.
Since we're not talking about a whole lot of money here, couldn't we appropriate it as if we're going to plan on paying for this insurance, as you're talking about, you know, as we want to encourage these folks to run these on, and then if Darren does some research using his Westlaw Edge and determines that the legal risk is too great, we could just use the money for something else later? Am I wrong there?
It's not a lot.
Yeah, it's not a budget problem. I think
Yeah.
it's more a
Policy.
policy
Yeah.
issue about whether
Yeah.
you're going to do it or not. And to us, $489 isn't much, but to others, it is.
But yes, we could easily do that, and then we probably want to have a discussion or a decision further away from the events than the week before, so we can
Yeah.
kind of give people guidance, but it does not have to happen today.
I think part of the struggle is when you see the amount of dedication that goes into putting on that event. For example, our veterans is the one event that I have personal experience with, and watching the organizer of that parade say, I need to pay bagpipers, can I find bagpipers, how am I going to pay them, and just feeling like I want to open up my own checkbook and write her a check, watching what she's doing and doing it just because she wants our community to show our veterans how much support that we give them, and your heart goes out to the cause. I'd like to find a way to do it, provided that we're able to make sure that we're not entering into too much risk for the city. Given that it is an individual that's putting on the parade and not a big organization.
And she pays for a lot of stuff out of her own pocket.
Right. I mean, I'd be in favor of doing community, if that makes sense, doing community promotions.
Yeah, I don't think, again, it's not the dollar amount. Why don't we just do a little more, we can check with our insurance carrier. and
What
get
I'm
their-
wondering is if we gave them the money as a grant, let's say, and not said it was a city-sponsored parade, but just that the city is.
Towards the defray the
Yeah.
cost of their expenses.
Right, and
Yeah.
they choose to use it
Yeah.
in the way that they choose. Does that make a difference?
It, not speak for Darren, but at some point, we want to have something attached to it that if it is important for us for them to have a policy that names this additional insured, that they use it for that purpose, not for something else.
Yeah.
But, I don't think there's, it really is more of a policy issue, than anything else. And we can amend the community promotions, because at least that way it's front and center, and that gets looked at closely, as opposed to be buried someplace else. Let's put a line item in there for, community event support, not specific to a individual, it's just a generic one.
Yeah, if you put $1,000 in there, just as Dina
I know
said,
that
it's
Eric
probably
had put on the
sufficient.
4th of July parade, he told me he paid $800, but yet we covered the one for the Veterans Day parade, and I was told it was $490. So it's difference probably because we got it
Right.
and not an individual. That's a big difference. That's almost double.
Mm.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
don't
if you
know.
allocated $1,000 to each, for grant support, I think that's sufficient. That's not gonna, again, be a major issue as far as the community promotions fund.
I hear what you're saying, Kent, about the fear that it's opening.
And what are you gonna do if a white supremacy group comes along and says,
They have
we
to
wanna,
apply.
we wanna have a parade, and you paid for their liability insurance, and we expect you to pay for our liability
They would
insurance.
have to
It's
apply to the
exactly what happens in
community
the city.
They would have to apply.
Well, I'm telling you,
And then
it's
the
still
committee-
good, yeah.
What if they came forward and said, we want you to help fund some of our operations in the city, a la the health, or the, Arts Castle, or any of those others?
They meet these criteria.
Right, and that's why I said at some point you can address it through, the policy, the city, can the city use money like that, and this comes from a tax, and can you just do whatever they want with it? There are still, even though it's discretionary money, still has to be for a proper public purpose. And so, but you got a lot of latitude to determine what that public purpose can be. And that was another reason why to identify this a little bit more, so we wouldn't run into as many problems with, city just quietly gave some entity $10,000. No, there is a public process, and council adopts independently that budget. So in doing so, you determine that it's in the public's best interest to use these funds for that purpose. And you make decisions all the time that benefit some people and not others. Excuse me, just how that works.
Since we're rewriting the criteria
I
anyway.
think, I was gonna say that we take that into take this into consideration. I don't think we have to really change anything right now. I think there's probably, once the policy gets reviewed and there's a recommendation comes back to us and we check with our insurance carrier and Darren does his research, we might have a better, I think we'll have more information to make the decision. Cause the next, that's not until, the next one is July, right? So I think
Yeah.
we just know that we have to, get a report back to you about a recommendation and let you then make the decision.
If there was any other.
Yeah, I don't,
council
just real,
changes.
we talked about the CIP amendment, we talked about, these other changes to the budget. We'll make those changes and then provide a update memo to you, plus the amended appropriation, plus the supplemental. We'll try to get that to you next week, by close of business on Tuesday. But we don't close out the end of the year with purchase orders until Thursday or Friday of this week. That's why there's a lot of work that goes into estimating what those year-end expenses are going to be. And I think that's.
So there'll be a couple other things. We'll try to delineate what Tom just talked about, at least what council had suggested being changed in the budget. There'll be some other modifications. At times there's projects or things that were appropriated in 2019 and intended to be done. You know, again, we run up against a timeline, and for whatever reason, it's not getting under contract. There may be some of those items that we reappropriate in 2020. Again, it's not taking money away from anything. It's money we already assumed was committed, rather than having to come back and do a supplemental next year. There may be a few of those. There was a couple omissions. I noticed one today in our sewer capacity fee fund. For whatever reason, I left out our debt service amounts. Gonna have to pay those. So there might be a couple of those changes, but that'll all be fully explained. And the actual budget ordinance will be amended, and I'll show you what the changes are.
So are there any other follow-up questions or comments? If not, I know Dean wanted to just spend a little bit of time just talking about our.
The mayor said I had, what, 45 minutes?
That was 45 minutes.
That's 45 minutes ago before we got into that discussion about, you know, invariably over the years, that's one of the things you see sometimes with budgets, and it's amazing the scope. But, you know, again, they're bigger policy issues. They're not always big financial issues, but they take up a lot of dialogue. Just real quick, I do want to walk through, and I hand it out tonight, and it's just easier for me to kind of talk about than to put up things on the overhead. One of the things that does drive not just our budget and our budget adoption, it's you know, our resources and what do we have. You know, it's an internal challenge that I've, you know, struggled with for years, trying to communicate what can be sometimes complicated information in ways that people can understand. And you know, try as best we can with the budget to lay things out, whether it's our operating budget or our capital plan, to kind of show where these resources are, you know, what discretion we have to use them for certain things. And that confuses a lot of people. We take in quite a bit of resources. I think, you know, our budget number is like $110 million. Where does all that money go? You know, a lot of what our resources are restricted, and that really drives all these different funds and certain things that we have we can't spend on a lot of different things. But invariably, that communicating that information, I know one of the challenges with council members, even over the years, or even citizens, is it's just hard to get a sense for what flexibility do we have to do things and not do things. And so I kind of want to walk through. I mean, we don't have very complex financial management policies, but it does talk about not just adopting a budget, but managing a budget as we go through the year, and what changes when things come at us. How flexible can we be? How knowledgeable can we be about reallocating limited resources? The first part of this management policy document talks about our operating budget. And I know we've had some discussion. We had a fairly lengthy one last year, and we've had them at various times over the years about what drives. You know, we all tend to talk about, you know, we can kind of sometimes wrap our hands around what a balanced budget is. I mean, that's got some connotations outside the financial realm. What a balanced budget means to me and what it may mean to you, trying to communicate to people, or even as a council member, somewhat being responsible to keep an eye on what the city is doing with resources. You know, that balanced budget may mean something different. But in going through and putting together information, I think it's important to understand that, you know, we do have, and this is the approach we take. And I'm not going to read all these things, but some of them are more important. It says in that first bullet, the city will pay for all current expenditures with current revenues and fund balances. You know, that fund balance is the confusing thing, the carryover balance, and how that plays into that. City will avoid budgetary procedures that balance current expenditures at the expense of future years. such as postponing expenditures, underestimating expenditure, overestimating revenues, or utilizing short-term borrowing to balance the budget. And there's all kinds of things I could do to balance the budget if that were the sole purpose. We could just inflate revenues or do any number of other different things. And we don't do that, and I don't, obviously we don't want to do that. We want to try to be as accurate as we can. And again, there's just some generic then policies in there. Will provide for maintenance and capital. City will protect against catastrophic losses through a combination of insurance. Don't want to talk about insurance anymore. So those are some of those policies just in general related to that. Under reserve policies, times that gets some issue and it gets some discussions. Did want to communicate, because especially this being my last budget here, to kind of give you a little bit of a sense of where we do stand from the 60,000 foot view. Are we headed for problems or challenges or issues or whatever else? Several years ago, I think I worked with the Finance Committee and tried to put forth a policy that dealt with that forever debated issue: is what's a balanced budget, what's a rainy day fund, what's a whatever, how much should we have in reserve? Should it be 9%, 10%, 50%, 100%? All those sort of things we've talked about multiple times. And several years ago, I tried to put back, actually not 2014, trying to look at it more from a managing our resources. And we do have a finite amount of resources, and we want to leverage them as best we can. And so one of those things related to that is this first bullet point. It says the city will maintain a targeted fund balance of 17% of the estimated annual expenditures in the general fund as a reserve to address unforeseen contingencies or to be able to take advantage of opportunities that may arise. Why 17%? Because it basically represents 2 months worth of expenditures. Have I ever been concerned over the years? We could have an 8-9% fund balance, and I wouldn't be too concerned about paying our bills or cash flow issues or things like that. Primarily because we're pretty diversified as a community. We don't have any one or two big, large employers that we rely on. We're not generally subject to a lot of catastrophic weather events. So we're pretty consistent from one year to the next. But that 17% was a figure we kind of agreed on. But how it is applied is the bigger issue. Rather than looking at and saying, what does that calculate it to be? But it's really intended to be connected to how we manage our budget after we adopt it. Because the game plan is that we're going to end the year with a 17% fund balance. To me, that's more important to managing our resources than saying we're going to adopt a balanced budget. But who knows where we end up at the end of the year? We could be way out of whack. But we got approval to spend $25 million in the general fund. But if our revenues came in at $23 million, even though we thought they were going to be 25, at some point we have to address that, and that forces that ongoing monitoring of where we stand and where we're going to be and what we're trying to maintain. And as things come at us through the years or throughout the year, if there's supplemental appropriations, if there's who knows whatever else, that needs to be taken into consideration. I do it. At some point, maybe a council may ask if you look at that and say, what does this $400,000 supplemental do to our policy of having a 17% ending balance, and staff should be able to respond to that. That was the general intent with that, to try to avoid because things do creep over from one year to the next. Again, we could have a situation that something came about this year. We got some resource that came in, or a big surge in some tax collection, and there's no way we're going to be able to utilize it yet in 2019. So we would appropriate it for 2020, but we got the money this year. Now we're out of balance. Our budget's not balanced because we're trying to expend something in the subsequent year. So that's where it's really that reserve balance that you're targeting to. Now, you have to be careful what you commit funds to, and something that came up at I think the previous council meeting. I think Councilman Keller, Councilmember Keller mentioned it about where do we at some point for the budget year. How do we do, or how are we doing? So if we look at 2019, obviously we adopted that budget last year. We had some supplementals, but where are we going to end up? It could be challenging because we get to this point of the year and everything's really trying to anticipate all this, try to look at that. But what if we do end up 2019 saying that, from what we, at least the general fund portion, and there's many other funds we deal with, but if we had projected, $25 million in revenue and $25 million in expenses, and our revenues were 26 and our expenditures were 24, what does that mean? Can't appropriate it next year because we won't have a balanced budget. And one of the things related to that, and that's one of the, what I was trying to accomplish with this year-end targeted, but as I was thinking, even today and yesterday a little bit, maybe to put a little bit more of a check in there to say that we just don't turn around and hire a bunch more people because we have this big fund balance carryover, and we're making long-term commitments for what might be short-term type of revenue surges. And we talked in past years. I've always thought it was important for us to, about the first part of the year, to revisit our capital plan. We adopt that earlier in the year, and things change, numbers change, priorities perhaps change. But maybe one of those things is to have that and make that a habit in January, to come back and revisit our capital plan. It's hard to try to appropriate things, by the time the dust is getting close to settling, to say, we had a little bit of a budget surplus this year, so let's let's do a supplemental and who knows what. But again, we could incorporate that in a review after all the final numbers are accounted for the budget year. And if we come back and initially look at our capital plan and say, so let's just, for wiggles and giggles, assume we had a $600,000-$700,000 budget. We had one in 2018. Again, early in the year, we had talked about, we allocated more money for road resurfacing, put more money into building improvements, quite a bit. And all that was done in the 2019 budget year. But if you look at that after we made those budget adjustments, do we still have a balanced budget? Because we added $700,000 of expenditures to our budget. And so the point I'm raising is that's an ongoing, constantly monitored type of issue. And I think one way to involve council a bit more into what happens and how that occurs is to, again, get back into that habit of first part of the year having staff come back and revisit and say, hey, we're going to propose potentially some amendments to our capital plan. Here's what we had prioritized. We have a little better feel for what resources are. We'd like to amend it. Maybe amend it down. If things aren't happening the way we intended, and for whatever reason our revenues were less than what we anticipated, we may have to adjust that down. But it helps, and again, because just looking at where we're at now and what was put in front of you with the 2020 budget, so the projected year-end balance is 22.9, almost 23% in the general fund. Is that more than it needs to be? Well, we can't appropriate anymore because then we won't have a balanced budget. And even though there's potentially resources there, most of it's carryover and some other related things. But that could be part of that discussion when we look at amending the budget. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to allocate more money out of the general fund to the CIP. We're still going to stay within our 17% targeted balance. We're still going to manage our budgets as we go through the year. And if things come up, we need to raise the red flag or the yellow flag and say, hey, we need to hold back because PBG shut down or whatever, and that might have a pretty dramatic impact on our tax revenue, then we need to do that. We need to be able to do it in a timely fashion. But other than that, just to give you the numbers, I put in red here. So our projected year-end balance is $5.926 million. The budgeted expenditure is $25 million. You do the calculation, and it says projected funds 22.9. So we've exceeded the policy of 17%. In addition to that, which is our general fund balance, we also created at the same time in 2014 a separate general fund reserve fund. And again, it's important to not just say that we set aside what amounts to $1.2 million that's in a separate fund. How do we use that? It was intended to kind of address well, is this a rainy day fund? Is it raining? How do we? And I kind of tried to communicate in the verbiage there a little bit what might be a situation where we might tap into that general fund reserve. We used it a couple times. There was a thing a couple years ago where we had to potentially get an airport grant. We had to come up with $500,000 like right now. And so again, without having to cut other things, we can do that. And if nothing else, it buys us some time to spread that over several years or whatnot. And so I'm just indicating here that we do have that reserve fund. Haven't utilized it for a while, but it is at that 5% level. And I did put an asterisk there. We also created a development reserve fund, mostly several years ago because we were a little bit concerned about some of these, mostly Glen Road, whether that was going to pencil out with all the houses, the more than we started doing that, and then get to hit recession, and it's like, not sure this is all going to work. So wanted to start setting aside funds so that if and when it didn't, but times are different. We're having a boom, and that should pay out here in the next 4 or 5 years. The other use of those funds was to kind of be seed money, and we've used and tapped into it a little bit for some economic development efforts. You know, more than anything, we talked a little bit when Sean was up here about economic. I know it's an important thing with council. Sometimes you got to spend a little money, and we've never had that too terribly much, that
Related to
flexibility to do that.
We'll probably be coming back in the first quarter of 2020 to make some recommendations about some targeted uses for some of those funds to provide some capacity. We weren't able to get the staffing capacity we were looking for in my office. You'll recall some discussions about that, but there are some uses of consultants and others that will help provide some of that, some of the analysis we need, whether it's the redevelopment of where the hotel is going to go, some of those kinds of projects. So, and that would be a proper use of those dollars, as Dean was indicating.
There's some things like that that come up. I think that the general intent that it was a self-sustaining type of resource, and more often than not, if we can directly attribute the use of those funds to bringing in taxpayers, the key is to have the discipline to say, if we spend $300,000 building this road, we think that we're going to be able to get business A and business B, and to say we're going to take the first $300,000 of tax collections from those entities, put it back to get that fund balance back up to where we still have a little bit of we don't have Dublin's resources, but we have something that we can build it and they come, or we offer it up as a grant, as an incentive. We've done that a couple times on a small scale to get some businesses in here. Well, the key is if you do that and the business comes in here, then rather than spend those tax dollars, put it back in here and replenish that fund so it's there. Otherwise, it's just $1 million that you're going to ultimately spend, and then you have nothing.
Health insurance.
Next one is the health insurance fund, and you will see a rather large supplemental. We, as you may be aware, we self-fund our health insurance. We buy stop-loss coverage for claims above threshold, and periodically you have some tougher years, and this clearly was one of those years. Last year wasn't so good either, but we had a really good track record for 10 or 11 years where we, in fact, from a budget perspective, there were a couple years in there where I didn't even change our health insurance costs to our departments. It stayed flat, which is kind of like, you know, most places they've always been going up. But anyways, we need to make sure that we wanted to make sure we had an adequate reserve in there because we do self-fund, and you know there's some criteria here, and I just dropped in the numbers, and we don't actually meet this criteria, but I knew that, and I knew that would be the case, but it's somewhat being mitigated by the next policy, which relates to our workers' comp fund. We do somewhat self-fund that. We're in the retrospect system, so we pay all workers' comp claims for a 10-year period. And same thing, the calculation for what's an adequate reserve is $929,000. We got a little over $2 million in that fund because we've done really well with our workers' comp program. And so that cushion there is going to help offset, and we can, because it's coming from the same budgets and the same funds, to help us hopefully we get over the hump with our health insurance. I know there's some program and changes that's being contemplated, but ultimately I just think it was, you know, a tough year, and I think we'll be okay from a reserve balance standpoint. Recreation Improvement Fund was connected to the bonds we issued, and that won't be an issue after we refund the bonds, so that's doing pretty well. The next one's deals, we tend to focus on the general fund, but we got a lot of other major funds, and our utility funds, you know, even though it's a little easier to change rates, you don't have to go to the voters, but they're still, it's all still relative. And I won't go through it, but the numbers are there, the actual numbers and how they comply with our policies, and we're in, and just say generally we're in pretty good shape with our water and sewer utilities. And we have more than adequate reserves. Several years ago, I actually set up and created a $2 million contingency fund in both water and sewer if we had some major issue that came at us. But even beyond that, we're in pretty good shape. The last couple of years with the building boom, we've also surged in capacity fees. I'm not sure if any of you are on council in 2008, 2009, there it was maybe. We had to surcharge our user fees, the people that pay their bills to cover the cost of adding capacity at our wastewater treatment plant. To a lesser extent, when we expanded the water plant, that was less of a capacity issue and more of a maintenance issue, but we've been using monthly utility bills that people are paying to help pay for the capacity expansion, that not just the plant, but Southeast Highland Sewer. We'll probably still need to do that, but at the time when we surcharged those rates, I said if we ever get to the point where the capacity fees that are generated are enough to pay that, we'll either roll back our rates, and that needs to be discussed because we, the last 2 years, we probably collected close to $7 million capacity fees, both water and sewer. And in prior, you can go back 3 or 4 years, and we only collected $2 million. And so there's that possibility it'll be a policy issue, and when we talk about rates, whether we just hold the line and direct less of it into those capacity to pay the debt service or not. But bottom line is we're in real solid shape. Talked with Blake, talked with Tom at times. I think we need to really focus in on a strategic utilization of some of those resources. But we're, I think, really solid shape as far as resources. Refuse fund, again, it's less subject to sways and bigger issues, so we don't really need to have a 25% reserve balance. If it's closer to 12.5 is adequate, and we're in pretty good shape with both refuse and storm sewer. So that's the abbreviated, and I won't talk much about it because I know we want to get out of here, but I did attach a summary of our outstanding debt. And prior to this year, we had over $100 million that we had borrowed, which is a pretty fair sum. We do get dinged a bit when we go to the rating agencies, and we'll do that here soon with the refunding issue. But what this shows is that most of that debt is tied up in revenue sources that we've created through our pay-as-you-grow approach, through either the new community authority or the TIF or the capacity fees with water and sewer that are funding most of that debt. The rec levy, again, we have a separate revenue source that's doing that. There's really less than $5 million of general fund debt that we have out there, and it's pretty easy to service. Made a couple notations in here. We're all, we have no problems servicing our debt at all. And the last bullet point there's about $60 million of the 95 million outstanding will be paid off in the next 7 years before 2026. So we had a couple major borrowings that are rolling off, including the wastewater plant several years ago. So that's just to give you a little insight, bigger picture. So if you had any questions or anything related?
I had one. I know everybody's a mess in here. You said that we get dinged because we're $100 million. What would it take so we're not dinged? What does that number need to be?
Oh, it's not a big ding, but they tend to look at it in metrics compared to others. And for a city our size with our tax base, which they apply that to, we have a higher outstanding debt. And I try to make the argument, yeah, but the resources are not property tax, because everybody else is property tax driven throughout the country. And they tie everything back to our assessed valuation. And our assessed valuation isn't climbing all that much. And in fact, it dropped down several years ago. So they look at that and they compare outstanding debt to our assessed valuation, and that ratio is higher than normal. And like I said, I tried to go on and said none of this is funded by property tax revenue. We have very little property. Doesn't make any difference. But again, paying down the debt, I think we do as aggressively as we can, just like with the refunding issue. Try to pay that down in 7 years. I think we'll pay that off. So.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Manager's report?
Yeah, just real quickly, I know there was some discussion about the work session. I'm still waiting to hear back from MKSK as to whether they can make that date work. The other thing to mention is that I did find out the majority of the funding for that report was Delaware County, between the commissioners and the Delaware County Finance Authority. There was additional funding, and I'm trying to get a little more information on that as well. Also, the Orange Township trustees, contrary to what I thought, were not briefed on it, so I think I talked this morning with Lee Bodnar about that. I think there's an interest on their part to do that, but I just want to correct that, clarify that. There's been discussion about the Boy Scout camp and the annexation, the sale. I'm going to try to get more information from City Council about that, in particular, and how that.
We got a City Council. Get it from who?
Get it from the Simon Kenton Council to provide the City Council. So that is something that came up, and I know that Lisa mentioned something about the SWCI roof. I want to try to get some information about that.
Is it still leaking? It is.
I'll look at Ted and ask him, but anyway, there was just some question about whether they should pay for that or whether the city should. I know right now it's the responsibility of SWCI, but I have to get a report from Ted and from Charles Dukes about what the severity of that repair looks like. So.
I just can't see us requiring them to fix the roof on a building that would be ours, and if we were using the building, we would fix our own roof, and as landlords, it seems like our responsibility to at least provide a place on the inside that's not leaking.
It's been leaking for years. I thought we repaired it. I guess I'm really confused.
Yeah, I'll follow it up. That's what I just don't came.
What we don't want to happen is it damages any further the inside of the improvements that have been made that they've worked really hard to do.
And we met with Pros Consulting today. There will be follow-up meetings with City Council, either through phone interviews or in person. That'll happen in January, but that project, that's the master plan, got kicked off. That's good. The Surface Pros are in. Most of them are in, and we're trying to get them set up so that you have them on the 19th, as well as just kind of the criteria as to how they're supposed. They can be taken home, right? That's was my understanding. So, and then don't forget the Delaware for Whatever It's Worth breakfast, which I know the mayor participates in this Saturday. And finally, if you take a look at the Cheshire Road Trail extension, that got finished over the weekend, I think, right, Ted? Yesterday. So that is done now. So there is a connection between Council for Lauderdale, Source Point, and points going east. So that's good news. That's what I have.
Okay. Any council comments?
Just, no one else. I just got a couple of follow-up on the budget. I really like Dean's idea of maybe March, first quarter, doing a review of now that the budget figures are all in, seeing how we can adjust the CIP and maybe fund some things we haven't. And I had a quick question on this. We allocated $89,000 for community promotions. Is that all we took in hotel fees, or how did we determine that 89?
Yeah, they tell us how much we have spent.
It's really approximately what we budget as a revenue. I believe it may.
There's about $40,000 in there that from prior years was more revenue than expenses. But just like the overall budget, we want to be careful about making long-term commitments. But there is something there to do a little bit more beyond that.
Okay. We need another hotel.
Yeah.
There you go.
And then
or then if we get one, they're going to keep the hotel taxes. So.
There you go. And then this Saturday at noon is the Oak Grove Cemetery, the Wreaths Across America. In the past, we've sold last year we did about 430. This year we sold 918 wreaths. So anybody that has some time on that Saturday at noon, please come and help place a wreath on a grave for a veteran. And with that, I will look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
See everybody next Thursday.
So we're adjourned at 9:41.
That's 7 o'clock, Elaine. Next Thursday night.
Yes.
7.
But not this Thursday.
Right, a week from this
Correct,
Thursday.
the 19th.
Following up on my email before about the value.